Hello there! For those of you who don't know, this is actually part 2 of my Kenobi assessment. If you haven't seen part 1, I suggest you do so before continuing on. In this video, I'll be going over episodes 4 through 6, as last time I did 1 through 3. And I'll be providing context when and where I see that it's necessary, but I have no intention of holding anyone's hand throughout this assessment. If I refer back to a point I made in part 1, I'll simply expect that you've seen that video and move on. So, now that the terms are clear, let's jump right back in. At the end of the last video, I made sure to mention that there's absolutely no way Obi-Wan and Tala are getting off of Mapuzo. Not with Darth Vader, fifth brother, fourth sister, and Reva all on their tails, and especially not when they have several units of stormtroopers. Plus, I'd be surprised if there wasn't at least one Star Destroyer overhead orbiting the planet, as that's simple Imperial protocol. But now, Episode 4 opens with Obi-Wan being ferried onto the planet Jabeam, hazy and continuing to dip in and out of consciousness as Tala and the loader droid rush him into the proto-rebel base and proceed to dunk him in a bacta tank. Oh, and for clarity's sake, yes, I'm just gonna continue calling these people the rebels because that's essentially what they are. Their organization is composed of a bunch of altruistic do-gooders who help people in need whenever they can by getting them off-world, all of which was gone over in the last video. The show seems to be implying that they're meant to be an early iteration of what will eventually become the Rebellion, and I prefer to have something to call them other than the Path People. Anyway, Obi-Wan gets dunked in a bacta tank and we go back and forth between him and Vader, who are both floating in their respective tanks. Now, I have to wonder exactly what Vader's doing at this point in time, as it's going to make up a lot of how the rest of this episode plays out. I really want to know why he just stopped looking for Obi-Wan when he was still very well within his grasp, but I know I'm never going to get any actual answers there. So what we're left to assume is that Tala and Obi-Wan somehow escaped and that some time has presumably passed. Enough time for Vader to go take a bath, I guess. At the end of the last episode, Leia was kidnapped by Reva, and as we're going to see in this episode, Reva took Leia to the Inquisitor base on this water world. The water world in question is a moon called Nur, which is located in the Mustafar system.
Nur. It's a water moon. It's in the Mustafar system.
And Mustafar, of course, is where Vader's castle is located. Now, Vader and Reva were both on Mapuzo together, which should mean that after she kidnapped Leia, it would be reasonable to assume Reva brought her to Vader. So, if that's the case, then where is Vader now? Just a few minutes into this episode, we're gonna get this exchange.
Is Vader there?
We don't think so. Our intel shows he's still on the ship, but he's close.
So what can we deduce from this? Did Vader leave Mapuzo on a different ship than Reva and the other Inquisitors, who were already on the base for the full duration of this episode? Or did he go on the same ship as them, but he just hung out up there to take a bath while they took Leia down to be interrogated? Or did he go all the way to Mustafar first just to use his bacta tank? Now you might be asking, Sheev, where are you going with this? And to be honest, I'm just trying to figure out how everything went down, since all the information we have points to Obi-Wan and Tala's escape having been an impossibility, as well as Vader's current location being extremely questionable. Why would he stay on the ship while Leia is being held on the base? Leia is the bait for Obi-Wan Kenobi himself. Surely you have to believe he's coming to rescue her. Which is what he ends up doing, by the way. So why the fuck is Vader not on the base? I guess alternatively they left Mapuzo on different ships and Vader's ship is slower? Okay, so yeah, that clearly doesn't make any sense. And the idea that there were 2 Star Destroyers orbiting the planet only doubles down on my beliefs that Obi-Wan and Tala absolutely should not have possibly been able to escape them, so I hope you're seeing my point here. Any attempts to figure out what happened off-screen between episodes to get us from point A to point B just leave more questions than answers, and that's exactly the reason they decided not to show it. But just because they decided not to show it doesn't mean it didn't happen. The universe doesn't simply cease to exist the second we stop watching it. That's not how storytelling works. We're meant to be able to believe that these characters are real people who do things whether we tune in to see it, so when we're faced with several incongruities that make it so that you can't even infer for yourself what happened, it's absolutely not just a nitpick. But I suppose it's a neat visual juxtaposing between Obi-Wan and Vader and their bacta tanks, both tortured by the events of the last episode. It's just too bad that in order for this scene to happen, you had to tell me that Vader would rather take a bath than interrogate his primary lead in finding Obi-Wan. And the scene doesn't even last for very long, because the prospect of being submerged in an environment that he has no control over causes Obi-Wan to freak out, and he comes up to the surface in a panicked frenzy. But Tala is there by his side ready to calm him down. She assures him that he's safe on Jabeam and that he needs to heal up. Obi-Wan then asks,
Where's Leia?
Which is an excellent fucking question. Tala, care to elaborate? You want to explain exactly what happened in the last episode? Oh, what's that? You fucking abandoned the defenseless child to go help a seasoned Jedi warrior? Well, that was extremely irresponsible of you. I'll bet Obi-Wan's gonna have some shit to say about that. Oh, we're cutting to the next scene. seriously? We're just not gonna see Obi-Wan address the fact that Leia's been captured because Tala fucking left her? I mean, don't get me wrong, it was just as stupid of Obi-Wan to leave her in the care of a complete stranger, and I imagine he would be kicking himself for doing something so stupid and irresponsible, even if it was for what he considered to be the right reasons. But the problem is, we're not gonna get any dialogue about this whatsoever. There's no time for that. He's not mad at Tala, he's not mad at himself, she's not mad at herself, everything's fine. No lingering tension between either of these characters, despite the fact that there absolutely should be. And of course, I fully believe that they should still be unified in their ultimate desire to go rescue her, but this is a conversation that at least needs to be had. And before any of you say it, no, I don't believe for even a moment that Tala could have held her own against Reva, but that doesn't even begin to justify her leaving Leia. Again, though, we're cutting to the next scene before anything substantive can be hashed out, and we find ourselves at Fortress Inquisitorius, where Leia is being held in an interrogation room. She protests that they have no right to hold her there, as she's the princess of Alderaan and her father is Bail Organa, a respected senator. And we went over last time how Bail's status within the galactic government should be completely fucked by now, but I actually want to explore this idea a little bit. It was one thing for Reva to kidnap the daughter of a respected senator back when she was acting undercover and using hired guns rather than a brigade of stormtroopers, because at least then Leia's kidnapping couldn't be tied back to the Empire. But since this show is trying to tell us that Bail somehow isn't going to prison for being confirmed to have ties with a Jedi in hiding, one might think the Imperial Senate would have a thing or two to say about all this, wouldn't they? And I bring this up because it only reinforces my earlier points about why Bail's a fucking idiot for wanting to keep her kidnapping a secret, despite the fact that going to the Empire for help finding her would have been the smartest possible option. Clearly, Vader and the Inquisitors wouldn't want anyone to know she's being kept here. And by the way, I had a few people argue against that point on Twitter, that Leia's kidnapping being confirmed to draw out Obi-Wan puts Bail in jeopardy. The argument a lot of people keep making is that Reva is the one whose plan it was to use Leia to bait Kenobi out, and since by the end of the show she's no longer in the service of the Empire, that should alleviate the Organas from any suspicion. So to those people, I have to ask, have you ever had a job? Like, of any kind? Because typically when you're working for somebody, there are gonna be reports to file. Vader would have wanted an exact accounting for how everything went down, especially when the Jedi in question here is Obi-Wan fucking Kenobi. He'd want to know exactly what methods were used to draw him out of hiding in the event that he might need to do so again. Of course, by the end of the show, he doesn't simply try again, even though he knows exactly where Leia lives and could have done so at any time, but I already went over that in part 1. The point I'm trying to make here is that Vader knew exactly what methods Reva used. If you want to argue that he wouldn't have asked, I would call you a fucking liar. But if you try to say that Reva simply lied because she secretly hates him or whatever, the Grand Inquisitor and the others also knew how everything went down.
You would kidnap an Imperial Senator's child?
I found a link between him and Organa in the archives. I used the girl as bait.
And there's simply no reason any of them might have to not be honest with Vader. And you know what's really funny? It's not like the show is unaware that the Organas are colluding with the Jedi and that that's obviously not something the Empire would stand for. Because then we get this line.
The Empire doesn't take kindly to Jedi sympathizers.
So you agree?
Just wow. But other arguments I've heard in defense of this are somehow actually worse. They like to argue that just because Vader and Palpatine are aware of Bail's treachery doesn't mean they can actually do anything about it, because to publicly execute or imprison him would be to risk pissing off the Senate and potentially even stir rebellion. But what's the alternative, really? Continue to allow Bail to operate in an official capacity and undermine everything Palpatine tries to do simply because you can't prove to the Senate that he's a traitor? Even if Palpatine can't prove in a court of law that Bail is colluding with Jedi, that doesn't mean that he wouldn't still see him as a threat, and there are a number of ways one might neutralize a threat or political rival outside the confines of the law. There are actually these obscure movies called the prequels, where Palpatine does this basically all the time, and you should definitely check them out. They may not be great, but they're sure as shit not as bad as this. See, it's completely okay if you like this show, but there are so many holes in it that I'm surprised it's not Wanda Maximoff's brother. So when you see me making these kinds of arguments, the best thing for you to do would be to simply say, yeah, that's a problem, but it doesn't really bother me, rather than trying to bend over backwards to come up with these kinds of defenses. They don't make sense upon even the slightest shred of scrutiny. Anyway, back at the Rebel base, Obi-Wan tells the leader, this guy named Roken, that he needs his help getting Leia back, and Roken says no. But then Obi-Wan says, please, and Roken says, no. And then Obi-Wan says, pretty please, and so Roken's like, yeah, okay. The reason Roken didn't initially agree to sanction the mission is because they simply do not have the resources to do so, nor do they have any actual combatants.
We're not soldiers.
But Obi-Wan dredges up a memory of Roken's about a wife who was a Jedi who got killed, and now he's on board. This is how you speedrun character development. By the way, the reason Roken started thinking about his wife is because Obi-Wan said, you have no idea what the Empire is capable of, which comes off as pretty tone-deaf. Of course he doesn't know this man's exact life story, but considering he's working for a cause that helps the oppressed people of the Empire, I think it would be safe to assume he has a pretty damn good idea what the Empire is capable of. But either way, it's decided. We're gonna go rescue the girl because, as Tala explains, Leia knows everything about their operation, and it's too risky to let that information fall into the Empire's hands. Probably would have been smart to not divulge all of your top secret information to a literal child for situations exactly like this one, and really you shouldn't be telling anyone, even the people you're helping, because you don't need to. You could easily take them to Jabeam without ever disclosing exactly where you are, so that in the event that somebody gets captured, that information doesn't get back to the Empire. Though I imagine I'm expecting too much from an organization that allows the Jedi they're sheltering to write their fucking names on the wall.
Quinlan was here.
Oh, by the way, speaking of Quinlan, I didn't mention this in my last video, but there are actually some pretty cool references in this show that, while they don't really amount to much, did make my monkey brain go off when I was watching this show. Of course, the version of Quinlan Vos being referenced here is this one and not the one that I actually care about, but it was still cool to see him being acknowledged in a mainstream Star Wars show. This is pretty superficial praise, but it is still something I thought was neat. As far as any actual references to the EU, Obi-Wan does mention that he thinks he might have had a brother who he never knew and only has flashing memories of. This is a reference to the Jedi Apprentice series. And of course, there's the big one, Jabeam, which, if you don't know, is a planet that's very significant to the story of Anakin and Obi-Wan. They were both stationed there during the Clone Wars, and it was hands down the most horrific and brutal battle in the entire war. Every other Jedi who accompanied them on that mission, of which there were many, laid down their lives or were otherwise brutally slaughtered, and Obi-Wan was even presumed dead during the battle and taken off-world to be tortured by Asajj Ventress for several weeks. The events of Jabeam went on to haunt Anakin for the rest of the war, and even well into the days of the Empire. The Jabeam arc in the Star Wars Republic comic series is easily one of my favorite stories ever told in this franchise, and when it was name-dropped in this show, I have to admit I got pretty excited. I was already of the opinion that the show is hot ass, and lo and behold, I was right, but I thought maybe, just maybe, we might get some cool flashbacks of the war and get to see Anakin and Obi-Wan's time there. And we didn't. In fact, yes, both Obi-Wan and Vader step foot on Jabeam during this show, but it means about as little to them as any other planet, so what a waste. And I'll be clear that the events of these comics aren't canonical to the Disney timeline, so I know they didn't necessarily have to adhere to that, but the fact that they pulled the name from the EU to use in this show without any of the emotional weight it holds for either of these characters just rings so hollow. It was done just to bait fans like me into getting excited, and then they did nothing with it, and that frankly annoys me. Especially considering that this show completely wastes Hayden Christensen as Anakin. We actually only get one official flashback scene between Anakin and Obi-Wan, which is interspersed throughout episode 5. And it's a fine scene, but it wasn't even close to enough. The Battle of Jabeam would have been the perfect canvas on which to set some really great scenes between these two characters, which could have reflected nicely with the current day conflict. But if I had a nickel for every time this show absolutely squandered its overwhelming potential for greatness, then I sure as shit wouldn't be sitting here talking to you about Obi-Wan Kenobi. Anywho, we're gonna go rescue Leia, or more specifically just Obi-Wan and Tala, so we're gonna need to make a plan. And it just so happens that Roken has some rough schematics of the base that they managed to obtain off the grid while it was being built. Obi-Wan takes note of the fact that there doesn't seem to be any shields, and we get this explanation from Roken as to why.
That's because no one would be stupid enough to attack them.
Oh, what?
Put a pin in that for now. I'd also like to point out that there doesn't seem to be any orbital Imperial presence over Nur when Obi-Wan and Tala arrive, which means that my earlier assumption that Vader and the rest of the Inquisitors went to Nur on the same ship can't be true. Otherwise it would have been there in orbit, or Vader would already be on the fortress by now. Which I guess means he really did take a different, slower ship, or he went home first instead of just going directly to Nur to interrogate Leia. Or, I don't know, maybe he stopped at Taco Bell. But Sheev, I hear you arguing, maybe this is just further proof that he stayed behind on Mapuzo to look for Obi-Wan. Of course, if that were the case, then they surely would have found him, him, since again, Obi-Wan and Tala were like 20 feet away from Vader's location when the episode ended. Besides, if Vader stayed behind to look for Obi-Wan, then so would the rest of his forces. Why would they leave if he stayed? So Tala and Obi-Wan are flying onto the moon and up to the base, completely unimpeded because, as we're gonna see much more of as this episode progresses, the defenses for this fortress are a fucking joke. But that's okay, nobody would be stupid enough to attack them, right fellas? And during the scene where they're on the ship approaching the base, we get a little part where Obi-Wan is trying to move something with the Force, but he's still having trouble reconnecting with it. Tala tells Obi-Wan that the past is a hard thing to forget, and that he just needs time to heal, both physically and emotionally. He tells her that some things can't be easily forgotten. The scene is fine, but I will say that this would have been a great moment for them to have that much-needed conversation I was talking about earlier, rather than them just being buddy-buddy like nothing ever happened. The ship then flies up to the base and is able to land completely unimpeded, because I guess clearance codes don't exist yet, and then Tala steps off and begins making her way through the base. And we don't find this out until later, but at some point before this, she dropped Obi-Wan into the ocean so that he could swim all the way to the base and she could let him in through a little garbage chute. And I love this wide shot because it shows us just how far away that must have been for Obi-Wan to swim. I mean, that's a small thing, really. It's not really a criticism. He is a Jedi after all, and he has a rebreather. If anything, this is actually a smart move, which is a rarity for these characters. We definitely don't want the base's defense systems noticing anything amiss, do we? Speaking of which, how is that faring? What Imperial precautions might we run into while infiltrating this base? What obstacles are there to overcome? Well, Tala approaches this checkpoint with metal detectors, and an actual Imperial officer is there to greet her and make sure that she's where she's supposed to be.
Yes! Hell yeah! Hey, come on, baby! Come on! Yes! Come on! Ah! Yes! Yes!
I'm actually proud. They have some semblance of security on this base. That's impressive. Now, don't tell the Inquisitors about this thing or they might have it taken down. We wouldn't want to upset their pride, after all. They know full well nobody would be stupid enough to attack. The officer says she isn't allowed through without the proper clearance, and she hands him her ID, which obviously doesn't work because this isn't the sector to which she's been stationed. Tala then pulls rank on him, which intimidates the officer, but then she says this.
Perhaps I should just inform the Grand Inquisitor of your insolence.
And that comment really should be raising some red flags, I would think. Now, we know that the Grand Inquisitor is alive, but let's run down the checklist of everyone in universe who would know he's alive at this point in time. Let's see, we have the Grand Inquisitor, obviously, and then there's Darth Vader, and... No, that's it. In the next episode, he reveals himself to be alive, and it's to Reva's surprise, which I would naturally take to mean that his survival was being kept a secret from everyone, barring Vader himself. Of course, there is the other option that everyone else was fully aware he was alive, and that the only one who didn't know was Reva, but I would literally rather eat an entire shoe than humor that notion, because come the fuck on. Seriously, everyone on this base knows he's alive, and she somehow doesn't find out? Yeah, no, not buying that. Try again. So the fact that Tala just told this guy that she's come to deliver classified information to a dead man should be all he needs to have her detained, but instead this is exactly what allows her to get right on through. Brilliant. And even if you want to argue that he made this mistake for fear of reprimand in the heat of the moment, he definitely had ample time and opportunity to contact one of his superiors to confirm her story, and I guess he simply didn't. Moving right along then, Tala goes to the school computer lab and opens up a little trash chute, which allows Obi-Wan entry into the base. He makes just enough noise to cause the stormtrooper that's for some reason guarding this door to go in and check it out, and that's when Obi-Wan pulls him into the darkness, and we hear muffled screaming and struggling, followed by Obi-Wan emerging from the room. Now, while I was watching this scene for the first time, I naturally assumed that the reason they decided to write it so that a random stormtrooper just happened to be guarding a fucking trash chute was so that we could have an excuse for Obi-Wan to have quick and easy access to a set of stormtrooper armor. Sure, it would have been a bit of a shameless callback, but definitely the smart thing to do here would be to put the armor on so you can walk around the base relatively unmolested, instead of having to awkwardly hide every time stormtroopers are in your general vicinity. But no, instead he just leaves the trooper unconscious without taking any measures to disguise himself. Remember what I said in the last video about how it would have been much more logical for him to keep the meth lab clothes while they were still on Daiyu, but they just couldn't pass up Obi-Wan's marketable appearance? Yeah, well... ditto. Anyway, we cut back to watching our intimidating new villain fail to successfully scare a child, and we get to watch her try to use that force extrapolation trick on her like she did with Haja, but not with Owen. No Owen. That would have been bad. You can't do that to Owen. Bad.
Tell me where the Jedi...
But you can do that with Leia, and it definitely won't fuck with the original trilogy in any significant way, right? After all, she has the Force, and we know from other things that that makes you impervious to such interrogation, even in an untrained mind. So, not to worry, she won't reveal any vital information.
It's the sister contest.
Only, hang on. So, the Empire knows now. They know Leia is Force sensitive. That's the only way she could possibly have just resisted Reva. Even fully trained soldiers conditioned for all kinds of torture, both physical and mental, can't resist such powerful technique without the Force as their ally, so... yeah, no, it's all over. I mean, it was already all over, but now it's really all over. Even if the Empire didn't arrest Bail for being a Jedi sympathizer, this is definitely enough for them to brainwash Leia into the Inquisitorius, if not just straight up kill her. And you know how in the last video I was saying that Vader should have figured out Leia was his daughter? Because she's a child who was important enough to draw Obi-Wan out of hiding and was conveniently adopted by one of Padme's good friends around the exact same time Anakin and Padme's own child would have been born? Yeah, well... here you go. This is the final nail in the coffin as far as I'm concerned. But some have raised the point that we can't actually be sure Vader knows that this happened, and so he may not have been able to piece it together. After all, Reva apparently doesn't have to file any reports, and I think it would honestly be ridiculous of me to assume that this place has security cameras. I mean, nobody would be stupid enough, so unless this stormtrooper just understood what was going on and reported it to Vader, I suppose it's fair enough to assume Vader may not have found out about it. I still believe there was enough information there, even without this scene, that Vader should have figured it out, but I'm willing to concede that he simply didn't know about this because there are no security cameras on this base. You do see how we're simply trading out one stupid for another, though, right? And I do also think it's weird you guys seem to just assume that Reva is withholding certain information from Vader when she really has no reason to. I know in the next episode it's revealed that she hates him and has been actively plotting against him, but she still obeys his orders and does everything she can to serve him, specifically to get close enough to kill him. You don't get to being Darth Vader's right-hand man by constantly lying to and omitting information from him, and since she would have no reason to, I seriously don't see why she would do that. But then again, I understand very little about this character. Her goals and the way she goes about achieving them are inconsistent and frustratingly confusing, which leads me to believe that she really can't be all that smart. But we're gonna unpack all that when we finally get to it. For now, there's more of this scene to talk about. Now, if you've seen my last video, then you'll remember that I asked you to keep an eye on Lola, Leia's little ladybug droid thing. Well... this is it. We're almost to the Y. Good grief. So once again, Leia has been allowed to simply keep this goddamn droid by her captors. Fucking really? I suppose there's not much the droid really could have done here since Leia isn't bound by rope this time, and I doubt it would have been able to hit Reva anywhere lethal with that stupid fucking power saw, but that's still extremely frustrating. There is an actual method to Reva's madness here, though. She has a specific reason for letting Leia keep Lola, and it's really fucking annoying. But I'm gonna leave you all in suspense for the time being. For now, let's head back to the computer lab to see how our heroes are faring. Let's see. Tala has just been noticed by some guy who I guess is like the guy in charge. I don't know, he seems to have some kind of authority. He tells her that this isn't her station, asking her to produce identification and leading her over to this area away from the rest of the officers. Now, I know she was acting incredibly suspicious, but I'm not really sure what metrics this guy used to deduce that she wasn't where she was supposed to be if he didn't even know who she was. I don't know, just seems like we needed a moment with a bit of tension, so we're throwing this in, but unfortunately, it's gonna do some damage. Because the second they go into this little area, she, knocks him out, I guess. We don't really see what happens, we just hear some noise off screen, and then we cut to her holding him in some kind of lock, and then he presumably goes down. And keep in mind that this is an affair that's making some noise, and it's not like they're in a different room with so much as a wall and a door separating them from the rest of these officers. The only barrier between them is this thing, so I don't know how the others didn't hear any of this. Nor am I sure how none of them heard Obi-Wan, especially this guy who was sitting right next to Tala and could hear her whispering just a moment ago, since she left her communication device right next to her computer with the speaker on, and Obi-Wan has been continually shouting,
Tala, can you hear me?
I guess these things don't have a volume setting or an off switch, so it's rather lucky that this officer decided to go deaf for a few seconds. In fact, like I said, they all did, but just for a minute or two. While Tala's gone, Obi-Wan is forced to fend for himself, and since he doesn't have her telling him when and where stormtroopers and other security personnel are, he's unaware of when he might run into any trouble. Which, again, wouldn't really be a problem right now if he'd just put that stormtrooper armor on, but I suppose the audience might have gotten confused if they saw Obi-Wan dressed like a bad guy. Don't worry, guys, he's still a good guy. He's only playing make-believe. Unfortunately for Mr. Kenobi, with Tala gone and no disguise to speak of, he gets seen by some Stormies. I mean, he does his best to hide behind this pillar here, but I'm afraid the jig is up, pal. They clearly saw you. You're done. So what happens next is... Oh, wait, what's... Oh, that's interesting. Sorry, it appears that they're not actually aware that he's there, which, hang on, can we get a playback just to make sure? Yeah, no, they definitely saw him. Well, then again, what was it that Luke said?
I can't see a thing in this helmet.
So I guess that's downright consistent then, isn't it? All the stormtroopers are blind. That must be why they have such bad aim. Maybe that's why that dumb motherfucking stormtrooper bonked his head on the door, thereby making Star Wars perpetually goofy and incapable of telling any good stories with depth, nuance, or subtlety from then until the end of time. No, but unironically, from the kinds of leaps in logic that defenders of the show keep having to make, this is the kind of defense I'm actually expecting for this part, so I'm preparing for it ahead of time. We all understand why that's obviously dumb. We can move on. Okay, cool. Well, these stormtroopers may be blind, but thankfully for our boy, they ain't deaf. In fact, he uses the same move on them that he'll later use on another pair of stormtroopers to momentarily distract them so he can slip away. Oh, you sneaky old coot, you rascal you. You can't teach this Jedi Master new tricks. I certainly love callbacks to better stories when and where applicable, but after all this bullshit, Tala is now back with her comm, and they actually chose to focus on this shot of the officer she incapacitated, just laying unconscious out where anyone could see him if they walked in. She literally made no attempts to hide him because why fucking bother? Obi-Wan asks where she went, and she says that she ran into a little trouble, but that it's been taken care of. No, it hasn't. He's right there. Anyone could see him if they're coming into this room. But we cut back to Reva and Leia and see that Reva has had enough of playing bad cop, as her attempts to intimidate an actual child clearly aren't working, and instead she tries to level with her, telling her that nobody is coming for her and that it's up to Leia to save herself. Obviously, Leia calls bullshit, but she tries to play along by feigning that she does want to help her, she'll just need to call her father first. And this pisses Reva off, so she fucking resorts to having her tortured. No, I'm not kidding. This decision is gonna raise some pretty huge questions about Reva's motivation as a character once we actually get into it, but I'm saving all that for the big reveal in episode 5, so let's put a pin in that too. For now, we have Reva ready to torture a child for the information she wants, and this is just one of those moments where you as an audience member are thinking to yourself, if I was one of these stormtroopers, wouldn't I realize I'm definitely on the wrong side of history?
Let go! Help! Somebody help! Help me, please! Help! Somebody help! Please!
Anyway, Obi-Wan has finally gotten to the same general area of where the torture chamber is that's holding Leia, and he enters a corridor where he finds what appears to be a bunch of dead Jedi suspended in amber, including a few familiar faces for those like me who know about background characters and for those who have seen the Clone Wars. Not much to really say about this part other than that it's creepy, I guess. I don't know. But it's while he's in this corridor that he hears Leia's screams for help and calls Tala to create a distraction, which she provides just before Leia is put to the needle, causing Reva to stop the machine. An officer tells Reva,
I was told it cannot wait.
and I suppose this is enough for Reva to cease interrogating the one lead she has to find the Proto-Rebellion. Again, where's Vader? Is he's still on his way? Okay, just let me know when he gets here. In the meantime, we could have one of the other Inquisitors continue the interrogation, but they seem to be doing fuck all, so Leia, you just stay put while Reva deals with this, I guess. So while Leia's just hanging around, the lights go out, confusing the two stormtroopers who are no doubt still contemplating their life choices, and then Obi-Wan's lightsaber flashes to life, taking out the trooper to Leia's right first, then turning it off, circling around to the trooper on the other side, and killing him second. You'll notice how many hits it took Obi-Wan to cut down these stormtroopers. Looks like Obi-Wan's lightsaber accidentally switched over to video game mechanics for this episode. That's inconvenient. Either that or you're telling me that the armor given to the average stormtrooper is stronger than that of Darth Vader, which... I mean, that's awkward. But yeah, Obi-Wan frees Leia, and now it's time to escape the base. While all this was going down, it turns out that the distraction Tala provided was herself. She waits for Reva in the Inquisitor conference room, and then tries to convince her that she was working undercover within the Path network to try to figure out where they were located. Obviously, Reva doesn't believe her, but Tala insists that the rebels are operating out of Florum. Reva orders the guards to take Tala to interrogation to see if her information checks out, which is when the base's alarm goes off. signaling that Leia has escaped. Reva goes to take care of it, and Tala is escorted out of the room by a pair of stormtroopers, who apparently didn't bother cuffing her or confiscating anything off her, because then Obi-Wan starts talking to her through her comm, which alerts her stormtrooper escort and forces her to take action. And I'm not fucking with you here, she actually slaps one of the stormtroopers, which seems to do a great deal of damage, as he's then disoriented for the next 5 seconds while she takes care of the other trooper. Obi-Wan, hey, go ahead and just pocket that weak-ass lightsaber. You don't need it. Apparently just slapping a stormtrooper in the helmet is enough. It's more effective, even. So Slappy over here stumbles back, and Tala goes for the other one, grabbing his helmet and pulling on him while going for his gun. When I tell you that this scene made me burst out laughing the first time I watched it, I'm not kidding. What the fuck is this fight scene? Oh my god. She manages to grab his blaster, shooting him, and then the other one, who's only just now managed to recuperate after that devastating blow a second ago. What you say? What a fucking train wreck. You know, as I go through this episode, I realize I'm doing that thing I sometimes do where I simply explain what happened and assume that that speaks for itself, because I trust my audience to not be a bunch of brain-dead idiots. And I am gonna try to stop that, but there are some even stupider things to come later on, so I frankly don't want to waste too much time on it. If you really need it explained to you why an unarmed woman taking out 2 stormtroopers by simply slapping and pulling on their armor is fucking ridiculous, then just click off this video. You're clearly a lost cause. And it's worth mentioning that this isn't even the most laughably stupid piece of direction from this episode alone. There is one scene that is far worse and far more infamous. It's coming up very soon, so stay tuned, folks. For the next little while, we follow Obi-Wan and Leia through several corridors as Obi-Wan continues to mow down stormtroopers and droids alike, until eventually, he deflects one shot and causes the blaster bolt to ricochet off his lightsaber and hit the window beside him, which leads out into the ocean. Now, I want to question why the Inquisitors would have underwater corridors on their base with windows surrounding them, and why said windows are so weak that a single blaster bolt is enough to crack them and compromise the whole structure. But I'm honestly much more worried about the fact that they built half their fucking base underwater to begin with. Why are these people so fucking stupid all the time? Then again, I guess I'm just making a mountain out of a molehill. I mean, no deep sea creature would be foolish enough to. Also, I'm once again bringing up Obi-Wan's training, because one thing that Jedi are pretty damn good at is deflecting blaster bolts. It's something that not anyone can just do, obviously. Bullets are fast, and to deflect them with a melee weapon is next to impossible without the Force as your ally. But since Jedi have the Force, they not only can deflect them, but they can do so while also aiming them to deflect back to a place of their choosing. This is pretty effective when their opponents are gun-toting soldiers like stormtroopers or battle droids, who have no shields or any viable means of defending themselves should the Jedi choose to send the bolt right back at them. But I understand that it's a Jedi's main goal to preserve all life when and where possible, in which case you don't have to send the bolt back to the man shooting at you. You can just as easily send it toward a wall or the floor or something like that. But you'd have to be a special kind of stupid to aim it at a window, especially when you're in a hallway that's underwater, which means that damaging said window will cause the entire ocean to come crashing down on top of you. It's a good thing for us, then, that this is Obi-Wan Kenobi, refined Jedi Master and experienced war hero. He's known for being bold and maybe a bit cocky, but stupid? Definitely not that. So tell me again, where did he send the bolt? Oh, I see. Well, shit. So, the crack on the window continues to expand, obviously, as the pressure from the huge body of water continues to push down on the weak spot, but Obi-Wan has not yet taken note of it, as he still has a bunch of stormtroopers shooting at him. However, he does manage to aim one of their blaster shots at a control panel, and it causes the doors to the corridor to close, trapping the Imperials on the other side as they work hastily to try to pry it back open. And it's only then, after Leia calls attention to it, that Obi-Wan is made aware of the damage he's caused. Although, weirdly enough, at this point, the glass is still fairly intact. I mean, it's only got like maybe a few seconds, but that's time enough to grab Leia and start bolting toward the other end of the hallway. The last thing you want to do is... Oh, okay, so that's what we're doing. Okay, so now, while you're holding it in place, you should start slowly walking toward the other end of the corridor, and don't let up until you and Leia are on the other side with the door closed.
Get her out of here! I'll hold it!
Hold on, what are you doing? No, stop. You can go too. Why would you stay behind? Oh my god. He's staying behind so that he can let it go once the stormtroopers get through. He's actually trying to kill them, even if it risks his own life in the process. Wow, that's fucking dark, man. Forget him taking Freck hostage. He's actively putting his own life in peril needlessly to kill these stormtroopers. Obi-Wan Kenobi, ladies and gentlemen. But Sheev, you may be trying to counter. Maybe Obi-Wan is barely holding it back as is, and doing any kind of physical movement will cause him to lose focus. I mean, don't forget, he's still pretty weak and has been having trouble connecting with the Force. Yeah, okay, no, he's clearly got his mojo back, because ain't no way he's holding back the entire ocean without being at the top of his game. And he's clearly not putting 100% concentration on keeping the glass in place, because he's also continuing to deflect blaster bolts once the troopers manage to crack the door open some. And all that on top of the fact that once the troopers actually come in, he lets the water flood the hallway and makes a dash toward the other end, somehow managing to outrun the ocean. And pay attention to this. Let me slow it down for you. He's actively moving the cracks on the glass in the direction of the troopers so that when they're all inside the hallway, they'll instantly get hit by it. He's definitely trying to kill them, even though this could have easily been avoided by just going with Leia and Tala once the doors were closed. Oh, yeah, Tala's here now. That's just sort of happened. So all that was a fucking catastrophe, but this aneurysm of a sequence ends with Tala closing the door behind Obi-Wan and grabbing a trench coat off of one of the dead officers for Obi-Wan to disguise himself in. Gee, yeah, that probably would have been a good idea to start with like 20 minutes ago. It's a shame no one suggested it. And yes, you heard me right, Obi-Wan puts on a trench coat. We're finally at that scene. The one I'm sure you've all been waiting for. The one that made me officially declare this show as parody, because the writing quality of this show, as evidenced by this scene, is not unlike that which you might see on an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. Here we go. The trio make their way into the hangar, and we watch for several seconds as Obi-Wan and Tala are walking by a bunch of stormtroopers and officers, the alarm blaring in the background to remind us that there is in fact an ongoing prisoner escape, and Obi-Wan is hiding Leia in his fucking coat. No, I'm not kidding. Look at this. Look at this SNL sketch of what comedians might pretend Star Wars is. There are literally 4 legs coming out of this trench coat. Obi-Wan's got a huge fucking lump on his side, and not a single one of these Imperials is questioning it. Oh, and don't worry, for any of you in the audience with an IQ of 7 or below, the writers didn't want you to feel left out, so they added a shot of Leia sticking her fucking head out to make sure you understand that that's where she is. How on God's biscuits and gravy can you watch this scene and still fucking defend this show? Seriously, give me a defense for this. I want you to look me in the eye and tell me that this is what you want from Star Wars. Oh, but it's okay! Because in 1977, a stormtrooper hit his head on a door! So really, everything in Star Wars is goofy! Fuck off! I'm sorry. I need you guys to understand. Yes, this is all scripted, but that anger was, that was real. It was real when I was typing it, and it was real when I fucking delivered it. This show is hot garbage, and you know what? Hot take, maybe. Episode 4 isn't even the worst on the show. I know it's the one everyone likes to hate on for some reason, even though it's really no worse than any of the shit we've already gone over, but I actually think the last 2 might be worse. And right now you might be asking, if you're a fucking numbskull, well, what do? How would you go about hiding Leia? Well, you see, I would have done just about anything else. How about you try finding a crate to put her in and wheel her out onto the hangar inconspicuously? Or if you're gonna make Obi-Wan a hunchback, have her ride in piggyback underneath the coat in a place where actual human deformities exist. I honestly think it would be less suspicious even to just have Leia out in the open holding Obi-Wan's hand rather than a big fucking bulge sticking out of Obi-Wan's side. This is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen in a show that asks to be taken seriously, and the fact that there are real human beings on this planet who defend this scene is enough to make me think the bubonic plague may have actually been onto something. Also, earlier they walked right past the 5th brother who barked an order to have the base shut down.
I want the base shut down now!
But when they get to the hangar, the doors are just wide open, so sure, fine, whatever. I know why they decided to disregard this little piece of continuity mere moments after it was added in, of course. They wanted to make it believable that Obi-Wan and Tala were able to fly out, as well as a certain other thing that's about to happen, but if you can't figure out how to write another way for them to get out, then you could at least have the decency of not including this little moment in the final cut. You're either actively trying to make a shit show, or you're not watching over each episode once they're done being made, and I honestly can't tell which is worse. But just before Obi-Wan and Tala are able to get to the shuttle on which they arrived, we hear Reva way off in the distance yell, "Traitor! damn, I can't believe she recognized them. After all, they're both wearing Imperial clothing, and there's absolutely nothing about them that looks off, otherwise why wouldn't any of these other highly trained soldiers not have noticed while they're supposed to be on high alert? Riva asks Tala if it was worth betraying everything she was for a child and an old man, and Tala spits back that this was never who she was. And so Riva says that she will die for nothing. But just as it looks like all hope is lost for our dashing heroes, rescue comes their way in the form of a couple air speeders piloted by the Rebel Path people. They just fly right up into the hangar bay unimpeded by any potential defense systems because the base has none. Because after all, no one would be stupid enough to attack the base, right? No need for shields or anything because no one would ever have the gall, nay, the iron chops to attack this completely undefended base where several major Imperial players hang out, because that would be a suicide mission! So the rebels kill a shit ton of stormtroopers, and one of them lowers down so that the trio can all climb in the back of one of them while the other continues to fire at Riva, and it looks really stupid. Now, for reference, these are the same exact speeders that the rebels used during the Battle of Hoth, so let's take a look inside the canopy to see if 3 people might conceivably be able to fit in one seat. Yeah, no, definitely not. I could believe it if it was just Obi-Wan or Tala with Leia in their lap, but there's not a single chance that all 3 of them are getting situated in that thing. So anyway, Obi-Wan, Tala, and Leia all get situated in that thing, and then the pilot of the transport begins to fly away, radioing to the other to stop shooting at Riva and to join in the escape. It's worth mentioning that he could probably have just rammed the ship into her, but what do I know? As they're flying away, the 5th brother runs up next to Riva and orders her to destroy them, which is an order that she has no reason to obey since the show has gone out of its way to establish that neither of them outranks one another. But she does anyway, despite the fact that a few minutes from now we're gonna find out that Riva actually planned for them to escape and so should want them to not die. And yeah, we're gonna get to that, but hang on. So she uses the Force to grab a bomb, which is just sitting in a little bin off to her right for some reason. Just a whole bunch of bombs hanging out in a bin on the hangar bay. Sure, whatever. She grabs one of the bombs and launches it at one of the speeders, taking out the one that's not carrying the main characters. How lucky. The pilot of the ship they're on yells out, "Wade!" And we watch in solemn silence as Wade crashes into the sea below. Gone, but not forgotten. I'd like to take a moment of silence to commemorate Wade. While he was literally only ever in one other scene where all he did was just kind of stand there and say one line, his impact on the galaxy at large will not soon be forgotten. Wade was a hero. I couldn't see it. And apparently once the heroes get back to the ship up in the sky, unmolested by any kind of air security because that simply doesn't exist, they're all really sad about Wade's death. It's a truly crushing moment. The scene I just mentioned, by the way, where they get back to the ship, takes place after a scene I haven't talked about yet, where Vader shows up on the base. So I'm not sure if this was just an editing mistake or it was intentional on the writer's part, but this means that Vader arrived on Nur and made it to the base before Obi-Wan and gang got back to the ship and left the planet. Which means he showed up in his Star Destroyer, which would be orbiting above the moon right now at this very moment, and yet somehow the heroes were able to escape once again. Good God. The writers made a point not to show them actually leave the moon, because obviously if they did, they would have had to account for a whole ass Star Destroyer detecting and then promptly detaining them, and then they would have alerted Vader to the fact that Obi-Wan had been captured and it would be fucking over. So instead, we see the speeder enter the ship while still in atmosphere, then it flies into the clouds, and the next scene is of them just already in space. Fuck this disingenuous show. Again, like I just said, this scene we're about to go over takes place before Obi-Wan leaves the moon, so how he got all the way down from his Star Destroyer to the base without being alerted to Obi-Wan's presence by scanners or by sensing him through the Force is beyond me, but regardless, he's on the base now and he's rightfully pissed. He picks Riva up with the Force and chokes her, berating her for allowing Kenobi to escape and telling her that she was warned what defeat would bring. And just to quickly reiterate the point I made at the end of the last video, to anyone who said that Vader let Obi-Wan go at the end of episode 3 because he wanted him to get stronger or whatever, here you go. Just one of the many examples we have of him absolutely not wanting Obi-Wan to get away. But Riva says through her choking that in fact she let him go, and she apparently placed a tracker on their ship and intends to use it to lead the Empire right back to the Rebel base. Now, This shouldn't matter to Vader because, as he said in this very show,
Kenobi is all that matters now.
And this is something that will even be reinforced later in the finale when he actually lets the rebels escape to go after Obi-Wan, which was an absolutely stupid decision on his part, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. For now, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page here regarding Vader's motivations. He just wants Kenobi. He cares about nothing else.
But my lord, the base was almost destroyed.
Kenobi is all that matters.
But I suppose you might be saying that Vader could be willing to temporarily let Obi-Wan go in this instance, since he can track him wherever he goes, and they might be able to kill two birds with one stone. But if that's the case, then Vader would definitely want to know where the tracker is specifically. And it cuts to the next scene before he asks her, but I have to imagine we're meant to believe that he didn't ask her. Because if he did, then yeah, no, she's dead. He'd be pissed if he found out where she put it. So then you might be wondering, where exactly did she place the tracker? After all, she was never anywhere near the ship they're on, nor did we see her throw a tracker at the airspeeder on which they flew away, so it must have been placed on one of them. Let's see, she never directly touched Obi-Wan in this episode, and while we never see her touch Tala, I suppose we could assume she managed to sneak it on her, though I'm not sure why she would have, since she couldn't have been certain Tala was working with Kenobi, so that leaves us with Leia. And I'm sure the suspense is killing you, so I'll just outright say it. Yes, it's on Leia. Or more specifically, Lola! That's right, ladies and gents. The goddamn cute ladybug droid that I've been telling you throughout this assessment to keep an eye on is now the bearer of the tracker. And it's turned her eyes red, so that means she's evil now. Reva presumably placed it on Lola after the droid tried to attack her and then slipped it back into Leia's pocket, and I guess she really was counting on Obi-Wan to come rescue her. Which is kinda weird, since if she was really expecting Obi-Wan to come and then lead her back to the Rebel base, I'm not sure what the point is of torturing her. Like, interrogate her, and then Obi-Wan will come and get her in whatever holding cell you have her in, and the result is ultimately the same. But anyway, the time is finally upon us. This whole time I've been telling you to keep track of this fucking droid, and this is why. So, let's go back down the list, shall we? First, we have her mother confiscating it from her, but then she quickly nabs it back. Tabri has knowledge, but she's cool with it, so fine. Then Leia gets kidnapped and doesn't have the droid taken off her when she's loaded up on the ship, which is almost what allows her to get free, thanks to this nifty little power saw that Lola has. But the head kidnapper guy stops her from cutting the ropes and smashes the stupid thing to pieces, leaving it on the floor of the kidnapper's ship. Inexplicably, Leia either managed to discreetly scoop up the fractured droid, or it was simply given back to her by her captors, take your pick, and she had it with her when Obi-Wan came to rescue her. Once they escaped Daiyu, he fixed it for her, and then at the end of episode 3, she was captured again, and the droid was once again not confiscated from her by Reva or any other Imperials. And I guess we're meant to believe that was because this is all part of Reva's grand plan. Fuck you. So yeah, all that bullshit just so that the droid could exist and be around Leia when the droid existing and being around Leia is not ideal. But you might be saying, well, if Reva didn't put a tracker on the droid, she could have just put it on Leia instead. So you're really nitpicking here, Sheev. But I would then refer you back to a moment ago when I mentioned how Lola is evil now. As we're gonna see in the next episode, Reva's plans with the droid go further than simply tracking Obi-Wan. Without Lola being corrupted, the entire plot of the last 2 episodes don't happen. And speaking of the last 2 episodes never happening, the last 2 episodes of this show really shouldn't have happened. Like, in universe, I mean. Remember how I said that if Vader asked Reva where exactly she placed the tracker, he would have been furious? Well, let's retrace our steps here. What has been Obi-Wan's sole mission this entire show? He left Tatooine and jeopardized Luke and the sanctity of everything to rescue Leia and return her safely to Alderaan, correct? So now that Obi-Wan has successfully rescued Leia again and is on a ship that can take him anywhere he wants in the whole galaxy, where's the logical next place he would go? I'll give you guys a minute. Alright, time's up. It's Alderaan. The next place to go is Alderaan, and that's where Leia fucking lives. So all the Empire would learn from tracking Leia's droid is that she fucking lives on Alderaan. And that's something they already knew.
So the only thing that you can tell me is that I will find Jabba at Jabba's palace.
And I know some of you are probably trying to tell me that the next episode actually addressed this and explains why they headed back to Jabiim instead, but no. Let's take a look at their explanation.
Broken. That transport, I need to get her back to Alderaan.
Once we get all these people out of here, I'll do whatever you want. They've been waiting for months. We used an old trade route to get them out, but the window's closing. We held it to help you get the kid. We only have a few hours.
First of all, I don't believe this isn't a conversation they wouldn't have had before getting all the way to Jabim, but yeah, that's what they went with. We have other people to help, so Leia has to wait her turn. Never mind the fact that we've already spared a ship traveling across the galaxy to go rescue her. Now we need to get her back to Jabim so she can be ferried home with the rest of the refugees. So let's take a minute to look at the officially canonical map of the galaxy, shall we? This is the Mustafar system, which, as we established earlier, is where Nur is.
Nur, it's in the Mustafar system.
This is Alderaan, which is located near the galactic core. Think Coruscant. Now, can anyone here tell me where Jabim is? It's way out here in this little nook of the Outer Rim, which means that in order to get there, you'd have to travel a much greater distance than you would to get from Nur to Alderaan. Alderaan is practically on the way. So I think it's safe to say it's a contrivance and then some that they decided to head back to the Rebel base first, but once again, we gotta have a finale, so we're stretching the conflict, baby. Which calls episode 4 to a very merciful close. What a fucking mess. 30 minutes of rushed plot and wacky shenanigans that straddle the line of parody and make me question my own sanity. Again, this is the one that pretty much everyone agreed was bad, but as we're about to get to, I don't see how you can hate on this one and give episodes 5 and 6 a pass. They're arguably a lot worse. But I suppose that's quite a controversial statement to make, and it will require some backing up. So let's begin. Episode 5 actually opens with a flashback scene. We find ourselves looking out at Coruscant through one of the windows in the Jedi Temple, and who should be standing there as we pan back but a young Anakin Skywalker in his Attack of the Clones getup, which means that this would have to take place before Episode 2. He turns around when Obi-Wan enters the room, and we get a good look at his face. So like I just said, this has to take place no later than Attack of the Clones, in which Anakin was 19 years old. And he does not look 19. I mean, I know Hayden Christensen is in his 40s now, but it doesn't look like they did a single thing to de-age him. We've already talked previously about how the makeup artists on the show are seemingly non-existent, but that's actually not entirely true. You see, in between parts 1 and 2 of this assessment being released, a little documentary called A Jedi's Return released on Disney+, giving us quite a bit of insight into the behind the scenes of this lovely series. And it shows us a bunch of background alien sculpts that look really good, actually. Like, I take one look at these and I can tell that considerable effort was put into making them look real and believable. Which is why I can't help but wonder, why was all that effort devoted to background aliens but not to the actual main characters of this show? This added context only really makes the show worse, because it tells me that A, they put in all this effort to characters that wouldn't even be at the forefront of the show and gave the actual important characters minimal effort, or B, they actually did try with the Grand Inquisitor and this was seriously the best they could do. Given the way some of these sculpts look, I have trouble believing option B, and frankly, I'm hoping against hope that it's not true, because if that's honestly their idea of a good job, then that's pretty emblematic of this entire show. However, another thing that we know thanks to this documentary is that they indeed did ostensibly apply de-aging technology to Hayden, and apparently that didn't count for jack shit. So that's pretty embarrassing. And I'd like to once again remind you all what the budget was for this show. I haven't the slightest clue where any of that money went, because it sure as shit wasn't for this. And for the record, I don't even think they should have done any CG work to try to de-age him. In fact, I assume they didn't try to, because they've proven time and time again that we simply don't have the technology to make that look good yet. Luke in Mando Season 2 and in the Book of Boba Fett was proof enough for that. Hell, even Rogue One, which had a much higher budget than that, had trouble with some scenes. I mean, I thought Tarkin looked fine for the most part, but Leia... Yikes. So yeah, I assumed they didn't even bother trying that with Anakin here, but it's actually worse that they did and that it just didn't do shit. He still looks like he's old enough to be Attack of the Clones Anakin's father. I would have much preferred they just do it the old-fashioned way and give him some makeup. It may not have been perfect, but they could have at least tried it, and the effort would have been greatly appreciated. I think Obi-Wan looks fine in this scene, but that might just come down to the fact that Ewan McGregor has aged a lot more gracefully, which might be helped by the fact that he was already getting a bit older by the time the prequels wrapped up. Still though, man's in his 50s and can easily pass off as a 35-year-old. In fact, at the present day point of the timeline, Obi-Wan is only 48, which means that the character is actually younger than the actor here, and they still had to apply makeup to add wrinkles and make him look closer to Alec Guinness. So yeah, Obi-Wan's fine, but Anakin... Not so much. But let's talk about the scene itself. I should start with the fact that yes, this is a flashback, and it's what I think most of us have been waiting for all this time. And I think it's reasonable to assume that when you're making a show about Obi-Wan Kenobi, and you have Ewan and Hayden both reprising their roles, that we're gonna get some flashbacks set during the prequel era. In fact, I assumed most of the show would probably be flashbacks, considering there's a pretty huge limit for what you can really have Obi-Wan do at this point in the timeline. But I have heard some people say that once again, fan expectations has made people blindly decide to hate this show, which is the exact same argument you might remember hearing after The Last Jedi. It was wrong then and it's wrong now. People think that we don't like this show just because we didn't get the Anakin and Obi-Wan flashbacks that we felt we were entitled to, which is a pretty terrible straw man for a number of reasons. Not only is that the least of this show's problems, but if you are someone who's mad at this show simply for that reason and that reason alone, then that's completely valid. Again, it's perfectly reasonable to expect there to be flashbacks in this show set during the Clone Wars or even before that. You could really take advantage of the different points in Obi-Wan's life and tie all the lessons he's accrued over the years into how he goes about solving his current problems. That would be a much better show after all, and it might actually mean that Hayden Christensen could have something to do beyond a handful of scenes where he gets to show his face and display his acting prowess. As it stands, there are only 4 scenes in this entire show that actually show his face, and he only has speaking lines in 2 of them. For the rest of the show, he's behind a mask and James Earl Jones, or some kind of voice modulator, is doing all the talking. What a waste. And like I was talking about earlier, this would have been the perfect opportunity to give us flashbacks of the Battle of Jabeem, since this entire episode is a game of cat and mouse between Vader and Kenobi on Jabeem. We could have seen how well these two know each other as they guess each other's strategies verbatim based on their past experiences on this very planet, making this the ultimate chess match between 2 rivals. But no, this one single scene interspersed throughout the episode is all we get between these 2 iconic characters, aside from what's going on in the present day. And I don't really like what's going on in the present day, so you see my dilemma. As a scene by itself, it's not bad or anything. It's not anything special, like it's just a sparring session between the two, but it works well enough. I can watch it in a vacuum and enjoy it just fine, and sometimes I do, because I quite like these characters, and this scene is unique in that it's really not ruined by being attached to the rest of the show. Every other good scene in this show, of which there are very few, are tainted by the fact that they're surrounded by awfulness, but this one is fine. Aside from the fact that Anakin is a 96-year-old man anyway. But as the flashback cuts off, we see Vader looking out into space as Reva enters the room and reports that Kenobi and Leia have arrived on the planet Jabeem. He tells her that she's done well and promotes her to the rank of Grand Inquisitor before ordering his men to set a course for the planet. On Jabeem, we watch the heroes set down on the rebel base, and as they exit the transport, Obi-Wan is just as surprised as I think most of the audience would be to see Haja Estri standing there. You all remember him, right? He's from the 2nd episode. He explains to Obi-Wan that after parting ways with them, he got into a fight with that scary Lady Inquisitor.
I got into a fight with that scary Lady Inquisitor.
And now he's wanted by the Empire. So, a couple things. Firstly, need I remind you all how those events actually played out? He didn't get into a fight with Reva so much as he stupidly and needlessly confronted her when it could have been easily avoided and got the information pulled from his head regarding where Obi-Wan and Leia were headed. So, yeah, I'm still mad about that, but wanted by the Empire? I don't know, man. I mean, I could probably believe that considering you gave her your actual name, which is something you also didn't need to do. But even then, she didn't really seem to care that much about you. After getting the information she needed, she just straight up let you go, which tells me that you weren't really even on her radar. But who knows, maybe after she murdered her boss and failed to apprehend Kenobi, she decided to spend time and energy on hunting down this random Jedi pretender. I guess that must be what we're going with then. Still though, one of the things I kept bringing up in the last video was the fact that Haja is somehow connected to these rebels, yet is also scamming good people out of their money in exchange for his services, and I would really think that Roken or Tala might have a thing or two to say about that, but once again, that's not addressed even once. In fact, I'm pretty sure he doesn't interact with either of them throughout either this episode or the next, so oh well. Something to keep in mind though is that the same lady and her son that he scammed back in episode 2 are actually here right now, and actually have something of an active role in the next 2 episodes. So I would have absolutely loved to see a conversation between them, but we don't get that either. We don't have time, you see. In any case, he goes on to say,
So now I know what it feels like being a real Jedi.
Which I gotta say comes off as pretty tone deaf when speaking to an actual Jedi who's been forced into hiding for the last 10 years. But if Obi-Wan has any thoughts about this comment one way or another, he sure doesn't show it, aside from a bit of annoyance upon hearing Haja mention that this place is a good business opportunity, implying that he indeed indeed plans to continue his scandalous ways. Oh, Haja, you old rascal you. Don't ever change. I miss Wade. Then we get that bit I mentioned earlier where Roken tells Obi-Wan that Leia has to wait with the rest of the refugees to get back to Alderaan, and if I could go ahead and add on to what I already said about this, considering they spared a ship to go rescue her, one of two, if I might add, as we're gonna soon find out, might it not have been smart to ferry as many of these people into that ship as you could before leaving to go rescue Leia? Remember, they weren't planning to help Obi-Wan and Tala with the rescue mission. They embarked on that by themselves, and it was only right at the very end that the rebels showed up to help. So if you're gonna do that anyway, then get as many people as you can onto the ship, and once Leia is safely rescued, get her back to Alderaan, and then take the refugees wherever they need to go. You've wasted your own limited time and resources to get Leia, but can't be bothered to make a slight detour to Alderaan? Yeah, no, I don't fucking buy that. And to those who might want to argue that it's dangerous to bring a bunch of refugees that are hiding from the Empire straight to the Inquisitor's main headquarters, need I remind you that, per the Empire's own devices, this base and the moon on which it sits stands completely unguarded by any aerial or orbital defenses. And this is to the rebels' knowledge. I still hold that that's fucking idiotic, but we're operating on the show's rules here, so no, I don't think it would have been dangerous at all to bring the refugees there. Obi-Wan then walks over to a huge wall on which a shit ton more of the names of the Jedi survivors and other refugees are written, which, as I briefly touched on earlier, is kind of fucking stupid. I glossed over it in part 1 because I kind of forgot about it, but it's really fucking moronic to be a Jedi in hiding and to write your name on the wall of the people helping get you to safety. Because then if their network is ever discovered, that'll make it a hell of a lot easier for the Empire to find you. Not to mention that it'll also confirm that you're still alive, at least as of the time that you were with the rebels. But what's even stupider is what's sitting in a chest right beside the wall of names. Lightsabers, a whole bunch of them even. They're just here and not with the respective Jedi to which they belong. Or maybe those Jedi were smarter than Obi-Wan and realized it wasn't safe to be walking around with them on their belts, but still not quite smart enough to remember that lightsabers can be taken apart, so they decided to leave them behind. But then, what are they doing just sitting here? I have to imagine these things are incredibly valuable. I'm not saying sell them on the black market, as I've seen others suggest, because that could potentially do a lot of harm. But there's some pretty nifty material that make up those things, which you could be using. Kyber crystals that could be used as energy sources, metal that could be used for anything metal related. Why are they just sitting in a box when these rebels are surviving off of provisions and barely getting by as is? This is baffling. But before you have time to really process the applications of that, Lola the imposter flies into a vent and sabotages the hangar doors, just in time for the rebels' sensors to pick up that a Star Destroyer has just come out of orbit and is above the planet. So now they're scrambling, trying to figure out what to do, and they all agree that the hangar doors need to be reopened. I don't really know how that's the plan you arrive at when Roken just said there's a Star Destroyer in orbit. The last thing you want is for those doors to be open, otherwise the Empire can just send TIE fighters down and kill all of you. Or if you want to argue that they wouldn't do that because Vader wants Kenobi alive, then that doesn't really change the point. Because if those doors get open and you fly out to try to escape the planet, you're just gonna get caught by the Star Destroyer's tractor beam, right? Or at least, that's what should happen. And actually, while I'm thinking about it, why did Vader have Reva order the droid to lock them in instead of just surprise attacking them with the hangar doors still open? Surely that would have saved a hell of a lot of time getting into the Rebel base, no? I don't know, guys. This is starting to feel like all the stakes are bullshit and are being arbitrarily manufactured to give the audience a false sense of tension, but then again, the entire premise of this episode is built on that, so we've been new. So then you might be asking, well then what should they do? And to be honest, we don't really have a lot of good options here, thanks to Roken deciding to take them back to Jabeam instead of Alderaan, thereby leading the Empire directly here. At this point, our best bet would be to hunker down and try to outlast them, and in fact, we do get this line from Obi-Wan in this very scene.
He'll attack next. He hasn't the patience for siege.
So I don't know, that's probably the option I would go with. But alright, fine, whatever. The plan is to get the hangar doors open, and then I guess we'll just have to ask super nicely for the Empire to let us pass. So Obi-Wan asks Roken how much time he'll need to fix the doors. Roken says that it'll take him a few hours, to which Obi-Wan replies that he has one. And despite the fact that that's not how that works, nor is it even remotely helpful, he moves on to ordering the rest of them to barricade every other entry point. While this is happening, the Star Destroyer sends out a couple of transports filled with stormtroopers and Reva to land outside the base, but no Vader because, well, I don't really know. Like, you'd think he'd want to be pretty hands-on for this, considering it's Obi-Wan fucking Kenobi we're talking about, but who knows, maybe he's taking another bath. But that leaves our newly appointed Grand Inquisitor to lead the assault, and she orders her troops to fire their massive cannon at this big door. The pilot from the last episode who survived instead of Wade, it should have been you, reports that the Empire is right outside and that they need to get those doors open pronto. Roken continues messing with the remote device, but he is unsuccessful in getting the doors open. Haja then helpfully chimes in.
That was underwhelming.
And I almost choked on my own saliva when I realized that that was meant to elicit laughter. Roken then spits back that he doesn't need Haja's input, and so Haja asks if he tried going into the vent to see what's wrong with the wiring. Not really sure why the controls to the hangar doors are in a vent and not on some control panel on the wall somewhere, but alas, Roken can't fit inside the vent because he's a big boy. This is when Leia gets off of her little box and declares that she's gonna need a ladder. Roken tells her that this isn't playtime, but Obi-Wan speaks up for her, telling him to do as Leia asks.
You trust me? I trust her. Get her the ladder.
Actually, Obi-Wan, I don't trust you. I don't know you, and I haven't been given any reason to trust you as of yet. As a matter of fact, you went off all half-cocked to save Leia and are now the reason that the Empire has tracked us here and is attacking us, so no, actually, I don't trust you one bit. Or at least that's what I imagine Roken would be saying right now in the alternate timeline wherein he's an actual character. He might also add that Obi-Wan should have no reason to trust Leia or believe that she has what it takes to fix the controls because... Actually, yeah, why would she? She's a 10-year-old girl who was raised as a princess on Alderaan. When and why would she ever have learned any mechanical skills? And before you guys make the comparison that everyone's already made, no, she and Anakin are not the same. Anakin was a literal slave to a man who owned a junk shop in which there's pretty considerable need to have technical knowledge. For all the film's problems, it was actually pretty genius of Lucas to write it this way in The Phantom Menace so that a 9-year-old kid could justifiably be able to race pods and build droids. Like I just said, Leia has had a pretty sheltered and luxurious childhood, and I don't see any reason why she would ever have to learn these skills. But even if she does know how to do this, why would Obi-Wan naturally just assume as much, rather than being like Roken, questioning her ability? If anything, writing it like that makes much more sense for Obi-Wan's character, and would also give Leia a chance to have some kind of throwaway line about how her father forced her to learn how to fix ships and stuff. But that would require an exchange of dialogue, so yeah, that's out. And now this is what we have. We're letting an actual child go into the vents and be our only hope of escape rather than just sending an experienced mechanic in there. I mean, the show wants us to believe that only Leia is small enough to fit in the vent, but look at the size of that thing. A fully grown man could sit in there. Or even if not, then just have an adult stand on a ladder right outside of it and lean in as much as they can. Do not put the safety of literally everyone on this 10-year-old. Don't do it. I'm sick of it. So while Leia's in the vents, Obi-Wan tells Haja to keep an eye on her, to which Haja tries to protest that he's not a babysitter, which is an excellent fucking point. Of all the adults in this base right now, this guy is actually probably the last person you want to leave Leia in the care of, but at this point it's downright consistent with Obi-Wan's character that he'll just leave her with complete strangers. And besides, he's getting a phone call. I wonder from whom it could be. He ducks into a corner and plays the message, and it's from Bail, who says that he knows they said no messages, but Obi-Wan's silence has had him worried. He's worried that Vader might have found him and or learned of the children.
If he's found you, if he's learned of the children.
And then he says that if he doesn't hear from Obi-Wan soon, he's gonna head to Tatooine, where Owen will need help with the boy. And then the message cuts off. So, where to begin? Let's take this one step at a time because it's a doozy. Bail motherfucking Organa calls Obi-Wan, despite their apparent agreement of no contact, because Obi-Wan hasn't made contact.
Your silence worries me.
Even though that was the agreement. Maybe he meant that he's worried about the radio silence because it's been a while, but that's not what he said, and surely he can't think that rescuing Leia is something that won't take time. And hang on, what do you mean you said no contact? Then what the fuck are we supposed to make of this line?
I let your parents know you're safe.
That sounds like contact was made to me, unless Obi-Wan was lying to Leia, which I suppose he'd have to have been, considering that conflicts with other established things in that very same episode, so...
You're in Daiyu now. All signals in or out are blocked.
Yeah, I guess that tracks. I guess Obi-Wan decided to tell Leia that her parents had been notified of her safety, despite that not actually being the case, to bring her comfort? Seems a little fucked up is all, lying to a little girl in a helpless situation that her parents are aware she's okay. But then again, that's only the fourth most malicious thing Obi-Wan has done in the show so far. But the worst reason Bail has for having sent this message, by his own admission, is that he's worried Obi-Wan has been captured by the Empire and that Vader might know about the children. Going on to mention a boy on Tatooine who's being raised by someone named Owen. Bail, you absolute brain-dead son of a bitch, what is wrong with you? Let's put this in the clearest terms we possibly can for anyone who's not following along. Bail sent this message because he believed Obi-Wan was captured by Vader. Now, considering the amount of times Leia has been allowed to keep Lola after being captured, I feel like the writers of the show need to be told this. But typically, when you've taken someone prisoner, the first thing you want to do is search their pockets and confiscate anything inside of them. They might have a gun, or a knife, or a little droid equipped with a power saw, and the last thing you want is for them to use any of those things on you or to cut themselves free of their binds. So if Obi-Wan has been captured by Vader, I'd say it's a pretty good bet that his comlink is now in Vader's possession, which means that as far as Bail's aware, and in fact specifically believes is the case, he has just sent a message directly to Darth Vader himself, showing his own face and revealing all that information to him. If you're Vader and you're watching this message and you hear about a boy of special importance being raised by someone named Owen on Tatooine, the first thing you're gonna think of is your stepbrother, who you've met and who you know lives on Tatooine. The second thing you're probably gonna realize is that Luke must be your son, because why else would Owen be raising him in secret to Obi-Wan's knowledge? And let's not forget that he said children, as in more than one. And we've already gone over all the reasons why Vader should have already deduced that Leia is his daughter, but if he saw this message, then that's the nail on the fucking coffin again. So I guess it's a good thing that Vader never gets a hold of this message, but not only does Bail have no way of knowing that he won't, but he sent it under the presumption that it was indeed in Vader's possession, so that's a huge fucking problem. I thought it was bad when he showed up at Obi-Wan's house, and it still was, but this is infinitely worse. Between these two major fuck-ups, Bail Organa has been thoroughly, irredeemably assassinated. I'm sorry, there's no coming back from this one. Add Bail to the list of characters who have absolutely nothing left going for them. It's become quite an extensive list thus far, and we're still so far from done. Although thankfully, for the sake of your own sanity, if you as an audience member are watching this in real time, you don't have the luxury of this sort of thing giving you a headache, because you don't have time to think about any of what's going on. Before you can even begin to consider the applications of what Bail has just done, Tala walks in and a new scene entirely starts happening. She rather abruptly begins explaining her backstory without being prompted, and we find out that she used to be stationed on Garel, and that she'd been deceived into rounding up a bunch of Force sensitives, men, women, and children all the same, who were all slaughtered while she could only stand and watch helplessly. And so now she helps people, and for every person she gets to safety, she marks another notch onto her holster. LMAO, she thinks she callous. What's more important here is that Tala is about to die in, say, 8 minutes. And since the show thus far hasn't really done anything in the other 2 episodes she's been in to explain anything about her character other than she's an Imperial but not evil, we're throwing in some last-minute character development to try to flesh her out a bit so that hopefully the audience might shed a small tear when she bites it. I mean, Obi-Wan seems to take it hard, which is interesting considering he hasn't really seemed to give a fuck about this person up until now, aside from how she might be able to help him. But I guess she really meant something. I don't know. But regardless, that's all jumping ahead a bit, so let's draw it back for now. It's taking time for the 10-year-old that they entrusted to save everyone's lives to get the doors open, so Obi-Wan decides to stall by initiating a parley with Reva. They both walk up to either side of the door, and Reva says, "Lord Vader will have you at any cost," to which Obi-Wan then replies, "You mean Anakin?" And he asks her how she could possibly have known that Vader was Anakin, given that Vader would likely have kept that a secret and she was too young to have known him. And I do actually find it interesting that Obi-Wan would simply assume Vader wants to keep his identity a secret, considering that he spent the last 10 years somehow not even knowing Vader was alive, so the last real memory he would have of him was when he still looked like Anakin and was flaunting around the name Vader while making no efforts to hide his face. It's a small and mainly inconsequential little detail, but it does tell us that the show acknowledges the fact that Vader hides his identity. Of course, we as the audience already knew that, which is why it was actually a big point of contention in the fan base when it was revealed all the way back in episode 2 that Reva somehow knew he was Anakin. I held off on bringing it up in the last video for this very reason. I was saving it for now. But I also wasn't quick to immediately criticize the show for that slip up. I knew there was still time to explain it and even figured out exactly how they would go about doing so. And I was correct. As I suspected, Reva really was that little youngling girl we saw at the beginning of episode 1. It was the most obvious reveal in the history of storytelling, but the show really dragged it out all the way until this episode for some reason. And this is also the moment where the realization reaches Obi-Wan, so I guess the writers didn't want us to know until he did. I mean, if that's the case, maybe don't open your show with that scene, unless they really thought that it wasn't obvious. But anyway, yeah, Reva was a youngling, and as she then explains to Obi-Wan, she and her group ran into Anakin and he cut them all down, even giving little Reva a nice stab in the chest before moving on to continue his massacre. She apparently hid with the bodies for presumably several hours, if not days, and the rest of the events that followed are not entirely clear. This is the big moment where Reva's true past and motivations as a character are all revealed, and they don't really make that much sense. Obi-Wan realizes that Reva joined the Inquisitorius not to serve Vader, but to eventually get close enough to kill him, and we're obviously meant to deduce that her capturing Obi-Wan was exactly what was needed to get her there. So, let's break this down as best we can now that we have all the necessary information. I'll go ahead and tell you now that it's also revealed later in this episode that Vader is fully aware of Reva's schemes against him, and I guess has just been playing the long game?
Did you really believe I did not see it, youngling?
So Reva was part of that group of younglings seen in episode 1, and she was the sole survivor among them when they came across Anakin, who slaughtered them all and stabbed Reva. She somehow survived that and remained completely still, playing dead for an uncertain amount of time, but it would have to be until at least after the massacre was over, I'd imagine. And somehow, without any medical treatment in all that time, she survived. And then I'm assuming she escaped the Jedi Temple and lived as a street rat for some time before eventually joining the Empire to try to get close to Vader for her revenge plot, but none of that's really clear. We don't learn when or how she came to be an Inquisitor, simply that she eventually does, and she spends the next 10 years looking for Obi-Wan specifically because she knows he's the one Jedi who can get Vader's attention. And like we just went over, Vader apparently knows Reva is the same youngling that he stabbed those many years ago, but it's not at all clear when he figured it out, or if he always knew, nor do we learn why he continues to keep her in his employ if he knows she's planning to betray him eventually and can identify him as Anakin Skywalker, because she, to his knowledge, has seen his face and watched him kill countless Jedi before ever wearing the Vader suit. If you want to argue that it's because she's just as determined to find Obi-Wan as he is, I would simply counter with the fact that any information she might find in order to draw Kenobi out of hiding is something he would easily have access to as well, if not more so than her, and it's safe to assume that he had no reason to believe she was also looking. But then you could maybe make the argument that he didn't even know about her or figure out who she really was until after she managed to draw Obi-Wan out, in which case we're back to wondering why he even keeps her around at this point when she's already served her usefulness and can now be disposed of. And I'm assuming he'd have to have figured her out by the time of episode 3, considering that by that point, he's actively hiding from her that the Grand Inquisitor is still alive. So why not kill her and sick any one of your other numerous Inquisitors after Obi-Wan, or just go after him yourself? You see why this reveal all kind of falls apart, because we're not really given any substantive information? Most of what I just said was pure speculation, because that's all we really have to go on. The pieces don't fit together as presented unless you do some major leaps and bounds and make a ton of inferences, and I'm not here to write the script for the writers. That was their job. And they failed. But like I said, this scene is very informative of Reva's motivations. We now know that she joined the Empire originally with good intentions, or maybe good isn't the right word. More like her goals happen to be aligned with those of our heroes. But along the way, she's clearly fallen from grace. She's maimed, tortured, and killed all sorts of people across numberless worlds, all in the name of the Empire, just so that she could get close enough to kill Vader. She's clearly pretty far gone, as she was willing to torture an actual child just one episode ago in order to get information out of her. There's a lot here that could be explored. And as we're going to see in the next episode, this character does get a redemption arc, but they don't manage to earn it whatsoever, nor does anything they do with her in episode 6 really make all that much sense to begin with. They had a lot to work with here, and as we're going to get into, they squandered it. But Reva tells Obi-Wan that she blames him for what happened to Anakin and asks where he was when Order 66 went down. And he doesn't have a response to give, apparently. It's not like he was off fighting General General Grievous and single-handedly winning the war or anything. Not a single excuse to give. He fucked up, he wasn't there. And for the record, I'm not saying Obi-Wan shouldn't feel guilty and blame himself for Anakin's fall. Of course he would. Moreover, he would hate himself for not noticing the signs sooner, for not doing anything about them. He would feel guilty for ever being part of an order that taught Anakin to suppress his feelings and forego his attachment to the mother that raised him for half his childhood. Of course Obi-Wan blames himself more than anyone else in the Jedi Order. But here's the situation. You are trapped behind a wall, which is the only thing keeping an armada of stormtroopers from gunning down every one of the helpless people behind you and taking you directly to Darth Vader. And you have a chance, right here and right now, to talk to Reva and try to reason with her. You know that above all else, she's out to kill Vader, and that's the exact same thing that you know you need to do. So regardless of how you're personally feeling, you need to put that aside and explain yourself to her. What she then chooses to do with that information is on her, but it's up to you to give it to her. Instead, Obi-Wan just stands there and says nothing. A million things he could be saying, should be saying, and he says nothing, because Obi-Wan Kenobi is a fucking idiot in this show. And due to this silence, Reva goes on to say that she doesn't need him or anyone else, and nearly kills Obi-Wan by cutting through the door with her lightsaber. Oh, that wasn't smart. Haven't you been trying to not kill Obi-Wan this entire time, since Vader wants him alive? That probably wasn't the best move. You could have killed him. However, I'm much more annoyed with the fact that apparently this door, which has so far been strong enough to withstand several blasts from this cannon, was just able to be cut through with a lightsaber. I don't know, maybe you should have led with that. And for those of you who are gonna say that the cannon weakened the door enough for the lightsaber to cut through, if that's the case, then surely just one more shot could have taken the door down, which means all you're doing by going up and talking to Obi-Wan is needlessly wasting your own time. And hell, if he was standing that close to the door when it was knocked down, it probably would have killed him, which apparently is what you want now. Reva's motives are inconsistent. Although I suppose there is the alternative explanation that lightsabers really are stronger than these new massive cannons, in which case, I gotta know what material they're using to make that stormtrooper armor. So yeah, Reva gets the door open and a flurry of stormtroopers rush in, assailing the rebels and refugees alike and forcing them back further into the base. Or at least that's what I assume is happening right now, but I can't really tell because the fucking camera won't hold still long enough for me to see. Which, as you've probably gathered from the multiple clips I've shown throughout both these videos, has been a persistent problem in this entire show. Even when action scenes like this one aren't happening, even when it's just regular fucking dialogue scenes. Because I guess Deborah Chow wasn't notified yet of the existence of tripods. Also, like I said, the stormtroopers here just kind of rush in. They're not in any kind of formation, as would be standard for any military faction, but especially one as buttoned up as the Empire supposedly is. Which I think does a lot to add to the confusion of this scene. There's no cohesion here, just a bunch of people running around shooting at each other. I feel like I'm supervising a group of 8-year-olds playing laser tag. I can buy that the rebels, who have already admitted to not being trained combatants, and the refugees aren't in any kind of military formation, but it's so embarrassing watching a bunch of stormtroopers just run around like idiots having no sense of direction. The show is just doing whatever it can to make the Empire look like a bunch of incompetent buffoons, which is an interesting choice to make when they're meant to be the main opposing force to your main protagonist, but whatever floats your boat. The rebels are pushed back all the way to the hangar where Leia is still trying to fix the doors, and because Obi-Wan is momentarily distracted helping one able-bodied person through the door, he's unable to deflect the stormtroopers' blasts, one of which managing to shoot Tala right in the gut. It's only then that Obi-Wan takes his lightsaber back out, but he's unable to get to her for some reason. I don't know, he's really busy taking on this one stormtrooper who holds his own against a Jedi Master for like 5 seconds. It's kind of embarrassing. But it's at this point that Tala realizes her life is forfeit. Sure, she could still probably get medical treatment and survive to see another sunrise, but then who'd be around to set off the thermal detonator that she's had sitting in her back pocket and hasn't decided to use at any earlier points in this fight where that might have been beneficial, like, say, here. I wonder if she knows if she can throw it. Like, she's hiding behind her loader droid who's decided to just also lay down its life, so rip Nedby, I guess. And she decides to activate it and then just sit there holding it for several seconds, waiting for it to go off instead of just chucking it at her enemies, who, need I remind you, are all huddled together in this little tunnel and were only able to escape the explosion because they started running before it went off. Had the bomb been thrown at them, they'd all be dead right now, and that would have been a significant help to the rebels here. And you can tell she really meant a lot to Obi-Wan because her death hits him like a 1-2 punch to the gut. Though I'm more concerned with the fact that this this is the end of the battle, as Reva has elected to withdraw her forces back outside in light of the explosion, despite the fact that we know it didn't cave in the tunnel, and we've just been shown that Reva's lightsaber can cut through pretty thick doors. She could easily just come right on in if she wanted, and then it's the end of the line, but instead she heads back to square one in order to give our heroes more time to plan their next move. Actually, Sheev, Vader is the one who orders Reva to stand down. Pay attention.
The Grand Inquisitor has breached the walls.
Tell her to stand down. Kenobi is already ours.
Right, of course. Silly me. Thanks for bringing it to my attention that Vader is the idiot at this point, not Reva. That was close. Yeah, like, Vader, what do you mean? She can go in and capture him right now. Why would you tell her to stand down? Well, the reason is that Obi-Wan is about to go out there and surrender himself to Reva, and I guess we're establishing just how insightful Vader is into the machinations of the mind of his former teacher. He already knows exactly what Obi-Wan's gonna do. So, sure, let's have Vader just give up his winning hand out of the expectation that Obi-Wan will do what he thinks he'll do, rather than just sending Reva in with all the might of her forces and take him prisoner. I still don't understand why he's just not already down there. And yeah, Obi-Wan does exactly what Vader predicts by going out and surrendering, and his reasoning behind this move is that he believes Reva's humanity can be appealed to, and that he can get her to team up with him against Vader. He once again entrusts Leia into the care of Haja rather than any one of the responsible adults in this building, and on top of that, he hands him his comlink and lightsaber. Roken asks him how he intends to fight without a lightsaber, to which Obi-Wan responds, "There are other ways of fighting." Does anyone else here remember the OT? Okay, cool, I thought it was just me. So he goes out into the tunnel and surrenders himself to a couple of stormtroopers, who I guess just decided to hang out back there and clean up a little while the rest of the Imperials headed outside, and they take him to Reva. She tells her men to inform Lord Vader that Kenobi is theirs, which means now Vader is coming, rather than before, when he should have. But had he acted, within character, then we wouldn't get to have this exchange between him and Reva where he convinces her to switch sides, so you see how their hands were tied. Now, I'm about to explain how everything goes down, and because it's all just a metric butt ton of stupid, I'm gonna try to explain everything first for the full context, and then go back and start breaking it down, because oh boy. So he tries to convince Reva that she needs to help him stop Vader, lest they allow yet another group of innocents be slaughtered like her friends were. Now, she never really seemed to be all that bothered by this in the past, but it's what actually manages to convince her, so what do you know? She asks him how he knows Vader won't see it coming, to which Obi-Wan responds that all he'll be focused on is him. Reva then orders the same pair of stormtroopers to take Obi-Wan back inside and shut the door behind them, so that when Vader arrives, she and most of her forces will be standing outside like chumps, while Obi-Wan is able to easily overpower the two that are guarding him, and then make a break for the hangar. Vader asks where he is, and she tells him that he's inside, only for Vader to find that he's run off, and so he follows after him. He enters the hangar just in time to watch as the transport flies off, but manages to catch it mid-flight with the Force and yank it back down, causing it to crash violently on the ground as he rips the hull off of it and revealing a hollow ship filled with no passengers. Turns out that one was a decoy, and the actual transport carrying all the civilians, rebels, and Kenobi was actually behind it, obscured by this fog, dirt, I don't know, I'm tired. So Vader watches as it flies away, and instead of just doing to it what he did to the other one just now, he's content to just let them escape. I guess defenders of this show will want to dust off that old Vader intentionally let Obi-Wan escape in Episode 3 argument and reuse it for this, because I can't think of a single other reason why he would do that. But then, of course, if that's what he wanted, then why did he forcibly bring down the other ship, thinking Obi-Wan was on it? And then, after all that, as Vader is watching the heroes get away, Reva tries to sneak up behind him and kill him, but he senses her with the Force, because obviously, and catches her blade before it can land. So, where to begin? If you're like me, you probably would have assumed from their conversation that Obi-Wan and Reva were planning to team up and fight Vader 2-on-1, considering that's what he fucking said he wanted to do. That was the whole reason she sent him back inside the base to be guarded by 2 stormtroopers, knowing he could easily escape. I was expecting him to be waiting for Vader in the hangar, maybe even to pose as a distraction while the rebels flew away, and then he and Reva could double team him. That would have been the smart thing to do anyway, and considering the next episode shows Obi-Wan kicking Vader's ass all by himself, they definitely would have won that fight. And I have to imagine that's what Reva was expecting too, especially considering this really awkward line we get from Vader here.
He was wise to use you against me.
So I guess Obi-Wan just tricked Reva into fighting his battle for him, knowing full well she wouldn't be strong enough to defeat Vader alone, because he didn't want to? I don't know, that's the only way I can explain this. There is only one logical interpretation I can think of for this sequence, and it's contingent on Obi-Wan Kenobi maliciously manipulating someone into committing suicide to fit his own goals. Do you see why this is a fucking problem? But I suppose this might actually have been fixed with a bit of actual planning and discussion, so maybe this is actually Reva's fault, since she just sent Obi-Wan inside without talking out the logistics first. If anything, could she not have just gone in with him, taken out the stormtroopers, and strategized with him while they were waiting on Vader's arrival? Then when he shows up, they could just both be there standing as defense while the rebels get away? But all that's ignoring the fact that Vader just casually strolled on into the hangar and pulled a ship from the sky, which completely fucks with a lot of his past scenes in this franchise. Like, man, it would have been really cool if he did that to the Millennium Falcon as they were escaping Hoth, or to the Tantive 4 as Leia was racing off with the Death Star plans, but I guess he just forgot how to use that power, so...
It took the combined ingredients of idiocy, ineptitude, and total disengagement for this farce to have reached the full apex of incredulous disaster.
Now, for the record, I know that this ability has been utilized in past Star Wars things. Kenobi didn't invent it, but it is still a major problem that should never have been introduced, because thanks to the examples I've already given, among several others, this power fucks with a lot of things. And again, if Vader can do this, then there's not a single reason why he wouldn't simply do it again 10 seconds later when the real ship takes off. Even if you still unironically humored the argument that Vader is intentionally letting Obi-Wan go to get stronger or something like that, like I've already said, that clearly just doesn't work considering what he did to the first ship. He obviously does not want these people getting away. None of it works, none of it makes any sense, you can't rationalize it. The more you try to write the script for them, the less they're gonna try in the future to make actual good stories, because they know they don't have to try. So just stop. Oh, and I should mention that while all this was happening, we kept cutting back to Leia, who got into a fight with Lola while trying to get the hangar doors open. No, I'm not kidding. And she managed to remove the tracker that also turned the droid evil for some reason. So tech genius Leia and her trusty little droid were able to get the doors open, allowing for Obi-Wan to abandon Reva to her fate. Hey, just checking, this guy is meant to be the hero of the story, correct? No, just making sure. But don't worry, I'm sure Reva's got this. After all...
You won't stop him alone.
You have no idea what I've done alone.
I will say, I appreciate this show for not trying to tell us Reva stands even a remote chance against Vader. In this scene, we watch as she puts everything she has into trying to kill him, and he treats it like a game, dodging and weaving and not even bothering to take out his own lightsaber. Even the Grand Inquisitor is no match for Darth Vader, and while you may not be able to tell from the show, given that he never once does anything combat-related, he's actually a pretty skilled swordsman, so yeah, I like that Reva was no match. The fight ends with Vader taking her lightsaber, breaking it in two, and throwing one piece of it on the ground to challenge her to a duel, which is honestly pretty sick. The fight itself is laughably terrible. Like, what the fuck is she supposed to be doing here? Look at her go. But it doesn't last for very long and ends with her getting stabbed. Though, as she's kneeling down awaiting her fate, we cut between flashbacks and the present moment and watch from her perspective as her child self is stabbed by Anakin and her adult self is stabbed by Vader, which is meant to be a neat little visual parallel. And it would be if it weren't also highlighting the fact that Reva has survived a stab wound 2 different times in her life after being left for dead and receiving no sufficient medical attention. And yeah, I'm jumping ahead just a little bit, but she does survive this. This is not the last time we see her. Hooray. Oh, and speaking of surviving stab wounds to the gut, guess who else is back? I've alluded to it several times over the course of this assessment. This is the moment where it's revealed to Reva, as well as the audience, that the Grand Inquisitor is alive and that Vader has been hiding that information from her because he knew all along that she was out to get him. I'm curious as to how much the Grand Inquisitor knew about the situation, but I suppose that would go a long way in explaining why he and the rest of the Inquisitors were always so mean to her for no reason. But I hope I'm not meant to believe that every single one of them knew the entire time that she wasn't really on their team, because nobody would knowingly fight alongside someone who's secretly plotting against them. Anyway, the Grand Inquisitor comes up next to Vader and gloats to Reva about how she's outlived her usefulness, taking back the Grand Inquisitor pendant that was gifted to her earlier in the episode and leaving her in the gutter where he claims she belongs. By the way, the only explanation for how he survived, as well as how Reva will survive here in a minute, is that
revenge does wonders for the will to live.
So yeah, fuck you, Qui-Gon. You should have been angrier. Quick side note that I just wanted to bring up because I find it really funny. Back when these episodes were coming out, some of the discourse surrounding the Grand Inquisitor's fake-out death was people trying to explain how he survived this by saying that Powans canonically have 2 stomachs. And so us fans who question it are just hating for the sake of hating. Now, of course, my initial reaction to this news was complete and utter shock that this guy was meant to be a Powan and not just a human who really likes white face paint. But on a serious note, to those of you who unironically argued this, you guys do understand that just because you have 2 of something doesn't mean you can necessarily survive without one of them, right?
It's important to me that you know that.
Like, if I got stabbed in the kidney, that's still a stab wound. I could conceivably still live on just one kidney so long as I get this injured one removed in time, but that still requires me going to the hospital and having a surgery, and if my assailant left me for dead in a cargo bay for God knows how long, I don't expect I'd survive that. Well, I guess not unless I had a strong urge to get revenge, apparently. But yeah, he's back, and he and Vader leave Reva there without even taking her lightsaber or anything. But I'm sure they see no need to, really. I mean, it's not like she's going anywhere, right? Oh, and guess what she finds? Would you look at that? It's Obi-Wan's comlink just laying on the ground. Look, it's even pulsating so that you notice it. What do you know? Now, anyone listening to this who has an elephant brain might remember where I last mentioned we saw this thing. Obi-Wan, for whatever reason, decided to hand it over to Haja, along with his lightsaber and the responsibility to look after Leia so that he could go surrender to Reva. So, how did it end up on the ground? Well, I skipped over it because there was a lot of other stuff going on, but as everyone was getting into the transport after the hangar doors got open, Haja dropped it on the ground and didn't bother going to pick it back up. And I thought at first that he must have just not seen it, but no, he definitely saw it fall to the ground, and he just decided he couldn't be bothered to go retrieve it. Yeah, man, it's fine. It's not like it's the comlink of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and it's probably extremely important. It's totally fine if the Empire gets their hands on it. In fact, it's quite lucky for them that neither Vader nor the Grand Inquisitor spotted it, because they were in the same room as it for several seconds while it pulsated to let everyone know that it was there. And you might say that they'd have no reason to check it out even if they saw it. It's just a comlink after all, probably belongs to one of the many refugees who accidentally dropped it on their way to the ship without realizing. But even putting aside the fact that you'd at least expect a few stormtroopers to be searching to collect anything from this hangar that might have given them information on where the rebels are going, it's also clearly meant to be an object of interest since Reva crawled her way over to it to see what it was and why it was blinking. Ultimately, I'm not even mad at Haja for dropping it though. He's an idiot. I expect nothing less from him. But Obi-Wan, I really thought you were smarter than to trust this guy, man. It's just so baffling to me that of all the people he could have entrusted his personal belongings to, he chose Haja Estri. It almost feels like he was the only real option the show recognized because he's an actual named character with speaking lines. So anyway, Reva finds the comm and activates it, and it starts replaying Bale's message from earlier. The one that was completely stupid and out of character for him to send, but this is why they did it, so that Reva can find it and hear the words Tatooine, Owen, and the boy.
If he's learned of the children, and Tatooine, Owen, help the boy.
That's all she's really able to make out, but because the show went out of its way back in episode 1 to show that Reva knows someone on Tatooine named Owen, who seemed a bit sus when they met, she manages to piece something together. I'm actually not really sure what she concludes from what she's given here, because surely there's more than one Owen living on Tatooine. She can't possibly deduce from this information that the Owen in question is the very same one she interrogated from the first episode, can she? Well, I guess this is Reva we're talking about, and she's been known to jump to some pretty incredible conclusions that end up actually being correct, so she's a regular Sherlock Holmes, that one. But if you're like me, you're probably also thinking to yourself, so, even if Reva somehow figures out that this is the same Owen she met and that he's associated with Obi-Wan as well as some boy, what motivation does she have to do anything with that information? You'd think she has bigger fish to fry, like going after Vader or even just escaping the Empire, who are still above the planet chasing the rebels. But how is she even going to do that when the rebels took the only remaining ship in the entire base and presumably on the entire planet? She's essentially stranded and in need of some serious medical treatment, but the show is treating this like like some big cliffhanger, even ending with a shot over a sleeping Luke, so I guess this will be important. All in good time, I suppose. Oh, and speaking of cliffhangers, let's see how the rebels are faring and set the stage for the final episode. They managed to get to space, but are being chased down by the Star Destroyer, who evidently didn't think to intercept their ship with some ties or even a tractor beam, and they can't jump to hyperspace because
our hyperdrive is down.
So, once again, we're ending an episode where the conflict ought to be over one way or the other, but instead we're gonna drag it out just one more time for an epic final showdown. You definitely don't want to miss it, so tune in next week. Don't let your sheer disappointment in the travesty you've just witnessed cause you to cancel your Disney Plus subscription until you've seen the epic finale of Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I would like to quickly say that this is the one that everyone told me I was being too mean to, because it's actually not that bad. Even among my own followers, I was seeing some people who actually thought this one was of quality. Now, by this point, after some time has passed and those overzealous folk have simmered down a bit, most of those same people would probably concede that yes, it's actually a pretty bad episode of television, and the ones who will still actively try to defend it are those who simply made up their minds months ago and decided to love this show no matter what. And I know their minds can't be changed, so I'm not trying to. However, even if you're someone who initially liked this episode and have since come to the conclusion that you were wrong, you're probably not going to agree with what I'm about to say, but I feel it needs to be said. I truly, honestly believe that this finale is the worst episode of not only this entire show, but that it's the single worst piece of Star Wars content ever to be produced under Lucasfilm by Disney. Even worse than The Rise of Skywalker. And now that I've said that, I elect to prove it. The episode begins on Tatooine. Woohoo! We find ourselves watching a man running a stand giving out water to the citizens of Mos Eisley when this guy shows up and cuts in line, being a real asshole. Remember him? No, probably not, as he was only in one other scene, but this is, in fact, Obi-Wan's boss from the meat carving place. Wow, this planet must be really small, because guess who he's about to run into? After pushing someone out of the way and stealing the water that would have been theirs, he looks at the man running the stand and asks, "Something you want to say?"
Something you want to say? Something you want to say?
And a voice from behind him says,
I have something to say.
Reva's here! Incredible! You know, kind of a shame Vader disposed of her so quickly. Had he kept her around much longer, she might have taught him how to teleport, seeing as how there's no way she got off Jabeam, especially not without a ship, and definitely not that fast. As we're gonna find out here in a minute, this episode picks up right after the end of the last one, as the rebels are still being chased by the Empire, indicating no significant time has passed, which means that even if Reva found a ship somewhere, she definitely isn't already here on Tatooine. But then again, I said in my last video that this show's sense of time and its scale of distance is laughably out of whack, and this is what I was referring to. And there's another moment in this same episode that's even worse, but I'll save it until we get there. I suppose there is the alternative explanation that several days, weeks, or months have somehow passed, which there is actually precedent for, as the rebels are now flying above an entirely different celestial body than Jabeam. There's no clear difference between the two, and when I watched this episode for the first time, I simply assumed that Obi-Wan and Vader had their final fight in just another area on Jabeam. But I've been informed that this is in fact a different place entirely, and considering the whole reason this conflict is still even going is that the rebels don't have hyperspace capabilities, these two places must be really close to each other. So I say again, it could be that several weeks have passed since the last episode and the rebels have somehow managed to not run out of fuel, food, or water, while also maintaining a consistent distance from the Star Destroyer chasing them, but it should be obvious why I severely doubt that. I think the simpler solution is actually better, even if it's fucking stupid. This moon and Jabeam are simply so close together that the rebels were able to fly there without lightspeed capabilities in a matter of hours or days at most, which is something I'd be willing to believe so long as this is a moon that orbits Jabeam, because it only takes 3 days to travel from Earth to our own moon in a standard rocket ship, and I could accept that even the most rudimentary ships in Star Wars are faster than anything we can cook up here, so that's fine. It of course only reinforces that Reva can teleport though, so I guess pick your poison. Anyway, she knocks the water out of the guy's hand with a very public display of the Force, despite the fact that she's just recently become a fugitive fugitive of the Empire, and is currently presumed dead by Vader, but I guess she doesn't care enough to try to keep it that way. And she limps up to the guy at the stand and informs him that she's looking for a farmer named Owen. Naturally, of course, he'll know exactly who she's talking about because there really is only one person on Tatooine named Owen. What a stroke of luck! Cutting to Obi-Wan, we get some shots that I assume are meant to parallel the opening to A New Hope, with one lone rebel ship being pursued by a massive Star Destroyer, and that might just work if any of the hefty budget went to the CGI. I haven't mentioned it very much throughout this review, but as I'm sure you've already picked up on via visual aids, it's pretty bad. This looks straight out of a fan film or some kind of parody, and I'm embarrassed for the VFX team for the fact that the shot they're trying to remind us of looks better than it, and it's in a film that came out in 1977.
How embarrassing.
I also find it interesting that Vader hasn't thought to deploy any TIE fighters or simply activate his tractor beam. Actually, come to think of it, how have they not overtaken the rebels simply by being faster than them? Again, they're clearly trying to remind us of A New Hope, but in that movie, the Star Destroyer managed to catch up to the Tantive 4 because the Empire are better equipped and have more efficient technology. Though I suppose this is downright consistent with what was established in Episode 4 of this series. Vader notoriously has the slowest Star Destroyer in the entire Imperial Armada. Roken lets everyone know that they're almost done fixing the hyperdrive and that once it's fixed, they'll head for a planet called Tessin, where they'll finish getting everyone to safety. This seems to reassure the rest of the passengers, but Obi-Wan surmises that their chances of getting to Tessin are dangerously low, and this is confirmed when Roken explains that the motivator has been shot and the power couplings are bad. He says he's working on fixing them, but he's gonna need time and that the shields won't last forever. Obi-Wan then goes over to talk to Leia, and she makes a comment about how scared the refugees are, and that Lola does a pretty good job of keeping their minds off of the impending peril they face. He smirks and jokingly remarks that maybe he should borrow Lola, and just put a pin in that. Back on Tatooine, Owen and Luke are in Mos Eisley, and they go into a shop to buy a new belt for their speeder, which is where the guy who was running that stand earlier comes in and tells Owen that there's something he needs to know. Now, almost none of what I'm about to say was actually in the episode, as we keep jarringly cutting back and forth between these two subplots without doing enough to establish the logistics for how everything went down. But just this once, for the sake of clarity, I'm gonna do a bit of writing for the show and make some major inferences as to how I think these events unfolded. I'm assuming after we cut away from Reva earlier, she extracted the location of the Lars homestead from the guy at the stand and then immediately started there on foot. Conveniently, Owen happened to go into town that very same day, and the man was fortunately made aware of their presence so that he could warn them about her. I'm assuming they then went home and were able to beat Reva there because they took the speeder while she had to limp the entire way, because when we get there, he informs Beru that she's coming and she still hasn't arrived. So quick side note that I noticed while editing this part, I don't know how I didn't realize this already, but the reason Owen and Luke went into town was to get a new belt for their speeder, which likely means that their speeder was out of commission, and we in fact don't see them use it at any point in this episode. So did Owen and Luke use the speeder to get to town, or did they walk? If so, how did they beat Reva there? Whatever, it just felt worth mentioning. I'm not sure how far away the Lars homestead is from Mos Eisley, but I'm continually impressed by Reva's ability to not die from her stab wound, while also walking through the harsh desert. Oh wait, sorry, I forgot she can teleport. My bad. In which case, it's a miracle that Owen and Luke made it back before she did. And again, a lot of that is just how I think everything went down, because the show doesn't bother to tell us. There's definitely a discussion to be had about how much the audience is expected to infer versus how much needs to be made explicit in the text, but that's a conversation for another day. I just want you guys to know that I had some serious trouble writing this part of the script because I had to make a plethora of assumptions in order to get us from point A to point B. But a plan needs to be made. Owen reminds Beru that they're on their own as Ben Kenobi is gone, to which she responds, "And whose fault is that?" I'm very curious to explore the implications of this line because it sounds to me like they don't actually know why Obi-Wan left. In fact, considering she's blaming Owen for him not being around, they probably don't even know that he's left Tatooine, just that he's no longer around thanks to Owen telling him to stay out of their lives. But of course that can't possibly be the case, because that would mean Obi-Wan didn't tell Owen and Beru where he was going and why he was leaving, or that he even was leaving. And I know Obi-Wan's been acting pretty out of character as of late, but that's kinda pushing it. I mean, he'd have to be a complete idiot not to make sure that the two people raising Luke fucking Skywalker are aware that he's not gonna be on Tatooine for some time, and that there's a chance he may never make it back at all. That would be absolutely insane. insane, so this show had better not be trying to tell me that. Although I suppose that doesn't matter right now. The point is, they're on their own. Owen points out as much and says that they need to leave and find some place to hide, but Beru asks where they could go. She asks if he intends to hide in the desert, writing that off as such a ridiculous notion, and decides that she's not gonna leave her home, as at least there, they have a chance. So, I don't really know what Beru is thinking. Oh, at least here we have a chance. No, you don't. This is an Inquisitor, a person who specializes in hunting and killing Jedi, allegedly. What are two farmers gonna do against that? Owen even points this out, saying that if they're gonna stay, they'll at least need help, but Beru refuses to put anyone else in danger, saying that the two of them are enough. Take one last look at Beru Lars, ladies and gents. She was never even much of a character to begin with, but now she's being put on the sacrificial altar too. What a shame. I can't fucking believe she actually thinks she and Owen stand any chance against an Inquisitor. And they have no way of knowing if it's just Reva coming for them. She could have an entire battalion of stormtroopers at the ready to come arrest them and take Luke. Hell, she might even bring Vader for all they know. They need to get the fuck out of Dodge. How the fuck was there not a contingency plan put in place for this? Did Obi-Wan seriously not go over potential hiding places for them should the need arise that they have to run and hide? They should have bags packed at all times so they can leave at a moment's notice. You can't be attached to your home when you're raising the son of fucking Darth Vader. They should have been prepared for the possibility that he might eventually find them. It's been 10 years! But no, they have nowhere to go, apparently. Nowhere to hide. No allies that can help them because Beru doesn't want to put anyone else in danger. Obi-Wan has failed them. Not only has he spent the last decade doing fuck all in regards to his own training, but he's done nothing to make sure the Lars family has a way off-world at the drop of a hat. Fucking terrific. Beru then pulls a couple shotguns out of a little compartment underneath the stairs and tells Owen that Reva will come when the suns go down, so they'd best get into position now. Not really sure where she's getting that information, as I don't see what strategic advantage attacking at night would give Reva as opposed to just coming during the day, but Beru evidently turns out to be right, so what am I complaining about? I just can't fucking believe this is actually happening right now. As all this has been happening, Obi-Wan has come to the decision that he needs to leave, as it will distract Vader and buy the rebels the time they need to fix the ship and get to safety. Leia, of course, is unhappy with this decision, but what I find funny is how many of the refugees also protest this. Like, I'm sorry, I'm sure they're good people, I'm sure they don't want Obi-Wan to die, but they have bigger priorities to worry about than whether or not Obi-Wan makes it out of this. We also haven't developed his relationship with any of them outside of Leia and, charitably, Rogan and Haja, so I don't buy that they care about him any further than that he's a Jedi who seems to be on their side. He gives a speech about how Leia and the young Jedi and rebels on board are the future and are what needs to survive, not him, and Leia storms out of the room. Obi-Wan goes to go after her, but is stopped by Haja, who says,
I find she needs to be given space. Take your hand off of me.
Like, bro, who the fuck are you? Get the fuck out of this show, man!
You're a stupid man! A stupid man!
But no, once again, Obi-Wan tells Haja that it's up to him to get Leia the rest of the way home as soon as Obi-Wan is gone. Because fuck it, he just keeps on trusting this guy for some reason. By the way, he never did ask Haja for his comlink back, despite having retrieved his lightsaber from him, because I'm sure that would have made for an awkward conversation, wouldn't it? Obi-Wan simply forgot that he had a comm unit, and that it was carrying a pretty damning message from Bail that he didn't ever bother to delete, and so he never thought to make sure that it was in a place where the Empire wouldn't find it. Lovely. Oh, but Haja's a sweetheart. He even talks to Leia for Obi-Wan, which gets her to settle down enough so that he can have a heart-to-heart with her. He says he wishes he could take her the rest of the way, but to tell her father that he tried. He then gives her a gift, and it's none other than Tala's holster, which I guess he picked up at some point after she died. It seems to be relatively intact, too, for something that was caught in an explosion, but then again, what do I know? But it's a sweet moment, I suppose, and it will inspire Leia to become the rebel we all know and love one day. Obi-Wan even remarks that he couldn't very well give her a blaster, as she's still just 10 years old, but he says she won't always be and leaves her at that, promising in vain that he will come back. We then cut to him sitting in the cargo bay, cradling his lightsaber and wasting the precious little time they have, but this scene is important as he has to have one last talk with Qui-Gon before going off to face Vader. He even says that whether Vader dies or he does, this ends today, which is a line that I want everyone to keep in mind. It's a line, however, that's met with no response, as we're now on the final episode of the show, and have still yet to get an appearance from Qui-Gon's Force Ghost. I feel like now would be the perfect time for him to show up and maybe give Obi-Wan a few words of advice, but I guess they're saving it for a better moment, so that's fine. Roken then enters the room, informing Obi-Wan that the dropship is ready for his departure, which I think is funny because aren't you supposed to be fixing the ship? Why are you preparing the dropship for him and not just letting Obi-Wan do it himself or having someone else do it for you? Just whatever. He tries one last time to plead with Obi-Wan that he doesn't have to do this, but Kenobi assures him that he must. This is when Roken has a realization and speaks it aloud.
It's not about us, is it? You want to do it. It's about you and him.
This is a question that Obi-Wan neither confirms nor denies, but in the language that is storytelling, that's practically an affirmative, and holy fuck. They didn't have to write this. There was no reason to even introduce it into the equation. They already had a good enough reason for why Obi-Wan had to go face Vader, to buy the rest of them time to escape. Do not tell me that he's doing this because he wants to, regardless of if it's even necessary, because that fucks with even more. I'm not even sure there's anything left of this character to ruin at this point, but telling me that he would abandon all responsibility and risk his own life needlessly simply to have a pissing match with Darth Vader is a pretty good way to challenge that belief. I'm sorry, that's not Obi-Wan. This is his clone, Obi-Wan. The real Obi-Wan Kenobi is on Tatooine right now, watching over the Lars family while his disposable doppelganger goes to save Leia. That is the only canon that I will accept. Though of course we know that's not true thanks to the arguably worst subplot of this episode, so fucking Christ. Anyway, he leaves out the dropship and starts heading for the other planet or moon or whatever the fuck it's supposed to be. And the Imperials take note of this, reporting to Vader that they're tracking an escape craft with one life form aboard, which of course Vader deduces is carrying Kenobi. Now, the Grand Inquisitor advises Vader that they need to continue focusing on the rebels rather than going after one lone Jedi, which is an odd stance for the leader of the organization which specializes in hunting Jedi to take, but who the fuck am I kidding? He hasn't cared about catching Jedi at any point in this entire show, so why start now? And the obvious thing you're all probably thinking right now anyway is that there's no reason they have to choose between one or the other. They could still send out TIE fighters at any time to continue pursuit of the rebels, or even just stay their original course while Vader goes alone to chase after Obi-Wan, which is what he ends up doing anyway. But instead, Vader ignores the Grand Inquisitor and chooses to let the rebels get away, diverting all Imperial attention to Obi-Wan. What a strategic genius, that one. Cutting back to Tatooine, the suns are setting, which means Reva will be here any minute now. Owen and Beru take Luke to a room and tell him to stay put, going with the lie that a bunch of Tuskens are raiding farms along the Jundland Wastes, and so it's not safe to be out right now. Owen tells Luke that if anything goes wrong, he's to run out into the desert by himself. Okay. I'm surprised Beru isn't protesting this command, considering there's apparently nowhere to hide out in the desert. Actually, why is Luke here at all? Like, fine, I guess I'll accept that you two are gonna stay here and defend your home and fucking die because you're stupid. But you really couldn't have dropped Luke off at a friend's house just to make sure he wasn't there when Reva arrived? Hell, he'd probably be safer in Ben Kenobi's empty cave rather than hiding on the farm. But it's fine, I guess. It's not like he's the son of Darth Vader or anything, and is probably the reason Reva's here at all. Actually, while we're on the subject, does anyone actually know why Reva's here? Because she evidently is trying to kill Luke, as we're going to see the more this episode unfolds. But why? To quickly remind you of what information she was given by Bail's message, all she knows about this boy is that he's important to Obi-Wan and is being raised by some guy that she accosted once. Why would that lead her to trying to kill him? Well, there have actually been a few different explanations given for this, by fans, of course. The writers couldn't be bothered to actually clarify this in the text, because that would have been hard. The stakes are kind of meaningless when you don't understand why things are happening the way they are, but they can't explain her motivations because she doesn't have any. Like, literally none. She is doing this simply because the script wants her to. That's it. But for the sake of argument, let's explore what some of the show's defenders have managed to come up with. Now, we know she knows that Luke is important to Obi-Wan, so some have speculated that she's trying to get revenge on him by taking away something he cares about. And I could see her being mad at him for straight up abandoning her to face Vader alone, but that's not the reasoning anyone defending the show has given me as to why Reva wants revenge on Obi-Wan. And frankly, I think that's because neither they nor the writers of the show want to address the fact that Obi-Wan actually did that, because that makes him look pretty fucking bad, doesn't it? Their explanation for why she's mad at Obi-Wan tends to be that she still blames him for not being at the temple when Order 66 went down, and of course for being the man responsible for the training of Darth Vader. But obviously, if you're gonna be mad at anyone for that, you probably want to direct most of your hatred toward Vader himself more than anyone else. In fact, wanting revenge against Vader is a much better motivator for her here, and I could almost believe that it's why she's trying to kill Luke. if she knew Luke was Vader's son. That's the second explanation I hear from Kenobi defenders, by the way. They argue that she somehow managed to piece together from that little bit of information that Luke is the son of Darth Vader, and so she wants to go kill him so that Vader knows what it's like to feel the loss that she felt. But even if we're accepting that she somehow figured out who Luke was, and I guess that's not too far-fetched considering how many impossible dots she's managed to connect thus far, this motivation still doesn't make any sense. She has no reason to believe that Vader even knows Luke exists, and in fact, from what information she does have, any reasonable person would conclude that he doesn't, considering he's being raised by some farmer on Tatooine and being watched over by Vader's archenemy, instead of living in some Imperial palace or at Vader's castle on Mustafar training to be an Inquisitor. So even if she did figure out Luke was Vader's son, killing him accomplishes basically nothing in regards to hurting Vader. Like, I'm just imagining her calling Vader and telling him, "Your son is dead, I killed him," and just showing him a corpse of some kid he's literally never seen before in his entire life. He wouldn't give a single fuck. So yeah, I don't know why Reva wants to kill Luke, I don't know how she even got here, and I don't know how she's still fucking alive, but this is the conflict now, apparently. It's built on so many major contrivances to the point where the story literally doesn't even function on a basic level, and yet people actually clamor to defend this hot pile of garbage. How embarrassing. Anyway, Obi-Wan lands on the moon and settles into this little rock formation, and when he takes off his jacket, he finds Lola in one of the pockets. The fucking nerve of this show. Evidently, Leia put it there as a callback to what she said earlier about how it's good at distracting the refugees from their dire fate, and him responding that maybe he should borrow it. Isn't that cute? Doesn't it just fill you with such joy and whimsy? And this is also meant as incentive for Obi-Wan to come back, which is just really touching. Wow, I've really come to love this droid over these episodes. What a great character. Would be a shame if something were to happen to it. Obi-Wan leaves Lola on the dashboard and goes out to meet Vader, who has just landed his shuttle right outside the rock formation. This is it, guys. The final confrontation between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader. For now. This is the real rematch of the century, or so I'm continually told by those who said I was too hard on this fight. Vader says, "Have you come to destroy me, Obi-Wan?" To which Obi-Wan responds with the classic memed line from Revenge of the Sith that everyone remembers.
"I will do what I must." Before
turning on his lightsaber and striking that signature pose. Yeah, baby, give it to me. Check all those boxes, you dirty whore. And there's more on the way. Vader even counters with the line,
"Then you will die."
Which fans of Rebels might find familiar.
"Then you will die."
There are a few moments like this throughout the fight, and really throughout this entire episode, where the show blatantly rips off aspects of things we enjoyed from the other movies and shows, whether that was for ironic reasons or because they're actually good, well-written moments.
Hello there.
But no matter the case, they just come off as cheap and hollow here. Some have elected to use the term parallels, but I think the word they're actually looking for is plagiarism. There's a key difference between a parallel and straight up copying someone else's homework, and I do think for the most part the examples we have here are nothing more than parallels, as cheap and disingenuous as they may be. But when you have Obi-Wan slice off half of Vader's mask and beat for beat recreate the scene from Rebels for your own emotional payoff, without adding anything new or of substance, then I don't know what else you want me to make of that. You're stealing from someone else because people liked that, and you're doing it under the guise of a symbolic callback. But I suppose that's jumping ahead a bit, as that happens at the end of the fight, and we've only just begun. And because of the way this episode was edited together, the fight between Kenobi and Vader runs parallel with Reva attacking the Lars homestead. So instead of constantly having to jump back and forth between the two, I'm just gonna go over each of them one at a time and break them down as thoroughly as I can. And since we're already here and talking about it, I suppose the Vader fight will come first. Now, as I was getting at earlier before starting this episode, there were a lot of people who rushed to the defense of the Kenobi finale and told me I was being too harsh on it. Sure, the rest of the show may have been hot ass on a stick roasting over a fire, but this one was actually pretty good. And my theory for why so many were initially tricked into liking this episode is because they really liked the fight, and especially the scene at the very end of it, which I'll admit was actually kind of touching and was the only scene in this entire episode that made me feel the emotions it wanted me to feel, but again, that's jumping too far ahead. But here's the thing, I am of the opinion that this fight is not very good. It's definitely a step up from the episode 3 fight, at least in regards to gravitas, but it's still pretty poorly choreographed. I'm not gonna claim to be an expert on fight scenes. If you're looking for something more in-depth on the matter, I'd probably recommend Shadiversity's fight scene autopsy for this duel, because he can explain it a lot better than I ever could.
Holy crap, this is This is a move so bafflingly bad, it's near unforgivable, because you have to purposely go out of your way not to strike your opponent here because it's so close. Vader's dead. This should cut him in half right here.
But I think it's pretty apparent that even to a novice like myself, there are several moments throughout this fight that just look terrible. Like what the fuck? What the fuck is this? Look at this shit. This reminds me of that part in The Rise of Skywalker when Kylo is fighting the Knights of Ren. Why would you remind me of The Rise of Skywalker? What the fuck? How is he alive right now? But all that to say, as bad as this fight is, none of that really matters. The fact is that even if this was like the greatest fight scene in all of Star Wars, that wouldn't do anything to change the fact that the rest of the episode is garbage. Let's just take, for example, The Phantom Menace, a movie that has a really neat fight. Again, I'm not the expert, so I'm not gonna definitively say it's well choreographed or anything. It just looks really cool, and the background music is fucking awesome. But The Phantom Menace is a really bad movie. It's one of the worst movies in all of Star Wars, topped only by 2 of the sequels. It doesn't matter if the Duel of the Fates was a really good fight, because it still exists in a shitty movie. All the same, the fight between Kenobi and Vader unfortunately exists in this show, and in its worst episode, no less. So whether or not it's really good is just frankly irrelevant. Also, it's not, so, you know, there's that, too. There is also something to be said about the nature of fight scenes in films. Ever since the disappearing knife incident in TLJ, it's become yet another addition to the list of what's considered nitpicking. Evidently, you're nitpicking if you notice bad editing or choreography in a fight scene, and you should just shut up and enjoy the spectacle, I guess. Doesn't matter that the Praetorian Guard had a fucking knife in his hand and would have killed our main protagonist halfway through the second film of the trilogy had the editor not come in clutch. Also, rumor has it that the knife learned its ability to teleport from Reva. In situations like this, people like to do that thing where in order to justify the bad thing and the thing they like, they have to try to point out the bad thing and the thing you like to try to prop up their sacred cow. Things like Mark Hamill kicking the air and Jabba's guard deciding that the wind resistance it caused was enough to knock him over, or the fact that Anakin and Obi-Wan do this little spinny thing with their lightsabers for several seconds. Those are admittedly both pretty goofy, but just because you've pointed out that there are bad things in the things that I like doesn't change the fact that there are still bad things in the things you like. You've essentially accomplished nothing. This is what we in the industry like to call whataboutism, the idea that you can somehow justify bad writing by pointing out where it might exist elsewhere. That doesn't make the thing you're defending look any better, it only makes other things look worse, assuming of course that the context supports their claims, because oftentimes that's not the case either. For the record though, I typically don't mind whataboutisms when they're employed to highlight inconsistent standards one might hold, and I'll even admit that they've caused me to stop and reevaluate certain things that I once considered great and realize they're not quite the holy grail I initially perceived them to be. That's all fine and good, just as long as it's understood that you're not actually doing anything to prop up the thing you like. It still has those flaws. But getting back to this fight specifically, I will say I commend this show for not having Vader say, "I have the high ground here," considering all the other hollow references they make to Revenge of the Sith in this episode. He then crushes Obi-Wan with a bunch of boulders and asks if Kenobi really thought he could defeat him before leaving him for dead. And I find it astounding that Vader didn't check to make absolutely certain that Obi-Wan was dead, considering there's no way he doesn't sense him down there still alive. Like, I know there's no way Obi-Wan should have been able to survive this, but he did, and he's using the Force to hold the rocks up, which means that he should be giving off Force energy, right? You're telling me Vader's just gonna walk away without seeing a body? I don't believe you. Either way, we find Obi-Wan beneath the rubble, channeling all his strength into holding the rocks up, and in his head several past lines from Anakin, both from this show and the prequels, taunt him and tell him that he's beaten. This is it, guys. This is the perfect time for some much-needed guidance from Qui-Gon. If ever there's a time for a Hail Mary, it's now. So anyway, he starts having a bunch of flash memories of Leia and, like, one single flash of Luke, who's arguably less important to him at this point, and it's all the motivation he needs to lift the rebel up and get out of the hole. Woohoo. So, I guess Qui-Gon just isn't showing up then, is he? I mean, this episode alone has provided us 2 great moments for him to appear and impact the plot in a meaningful way, and he hasn't yet, and now it looks like we're ramping up for the final confrontation, so yeah, I guess he's just not coming. What a shame. That's such a wasted opportunity. Well, regardless, Obi-Wan then sneak attacks Vader and the duel continues. It gets to the point where he manages to force push Vader into a giant pillar, and then he goes sicko mode and lifts a shit ton of rocks in the air and starts pummeling Vader with them. Don't worry guys, they're just papier-mâché rocks. They're not capable of actually damaging Vader or his suit or crippling him in any way. It's totally fine. This is but a momentary distraction meant to display Obi-Wan's awesome power, as well as his full reconnection with the Force. We've done it, guys. Obi-Wan Kenobi is back. Now, I've heard people criticize this part solely on the basis of it being too OP for Obi-Wan to lift a bunch of rocks at one time, something which Yoda struggled to do in Attack of the Clones, but I actually disagree with that. Size Matters Not was the first tautology Yoda gave us on how the Force works, wherein he very clearly states and then proves that it doesn't matter how large an object is, the power of the Force is far greater. If anything, Yoda struggling to lift heavy things in the prequels is inconsistent with what's established in the OT, and is therefore one of that film's many flaws. This same scene, by the way, is used to criticize The Last Jedi for the same reason, serving as yet another checkmark in the Marae-Sue argument, but as I've just gone over, I'm much more inclined to side with what's clearly in step with the original rules established. Which isn't to say I don't think certain limits need to be made, of course. If there's no limit to the size of an object a Force user can move, the fight scenes would become ridiculous. At any time, someone could simply drop a moon on their opponent, or any other number of things. I'm simply saying that the limitations need to be made more explicit, and they haven't been. Either way, I don't really take an issue with Obi-Wan being able to pull this feat. I'm much more angry with none of the rocks doing anything to damage Vader. I don't give this show many praises, but I feel it's worth defending when there's actually something to defend. I simply want everybody to be consistent when and where they apply their standards, that's all. Anyway, the fight continues, and Obi-Wan does this really weird thing where he, turns his lightsaber around and starts striking Vader with the hilt of his weapon rather than the blade. And Vader stands there like a fucking idiot, not bothering to block any of the blows, which means Obi-Wan has multiple opportunities over the course of several seconds to stab, cut, or otherwise dismember Vader in any number of ways, and he chooses instead to hit him with the non-lethal part of his melee weapon. When Vader finally does snap back to the present and remembers what scene he's in, he goes to block a killing blow, but Obi-Wan hits him with another rock, which, curiously enough, actually seems to affect him this time. This must have been a real rock. Vader stumbles a bit and Obi-Wan comes up behind him, giving him a slash on the back that knocks Vader to his knees. Vader quickly composes himself, but is then immediately pushed down again, and then Obi-Wan goes for the final blow. He jumps up on a rock and comes down with a swing that slashes Vader's mask, cutting a large hole in it over his eye, which looks familiar, but we've already been over that. Oh, but something you might have noticed if you looked at these two shots side by side is that the one in this show has it over his left eye, whereas the one in Rebels has the cut over his right eye. And I kid you not, this is what some people have elected to call symbolism. This is visual storytelling, bro! It tells you a lot about Vader as a character! Ahsoka cut one half, Obi-Wan cut the other, but only Luke was able to take the mask off fully! This is art!
Did you guys know that when Anakin is talking, there's blue lighting on his face, but when it's Vader talking, it turns red? This is some masterful symbolism, and I noticed it because I'm really smart and cool and media literate.
This is some of the most basic shit I've ever seen, and the fact that anyone would find it impressive makes me actually feel sad for them. You know what's a good bit of subtle visual storytelling? Peter Parker opening up his closet and having two suits, one for Peter and one for Spider-Man. Or how about in the Breaking Bad finale when Walter and Skyler are talking for one last time and there's a literal wedge between them? That's inspired. Or hey, let's do a Star Wars example. Luke being about to kill Vader and then looking down at his black gloved hand and realizing he's becoming him. These are examples of visual storytelling done masterfully but also subtly. Having the coloring change from blue to red when Vader says something evil is the laziest thing you could do and still call it art. But hey, points for trying, I guess. And what did Vader say exactly? Well, upon seeing Vader in this state, Obi-Wan said,
"Anakin."
To which Vader replied that Anakin is gone and Vader is all that remains. Obi-Wan tries to apologize for everything that's happened, and for once it seems like Ewan McGregor is actually trying, so there's a plus. Vader then responds to this by saying that he is not Obi-Wan's failure, as it was not Obi-Wan who killed Anakin Skywalker, but Vader. I take issue with this line. Yeah, I know, surprise, surprise. Not because I don't believe this to be true, or that Vader would believe this himself, because he absolutely does. But I don't see a scenario where he ever tells Obi-Wan this, because that would alleviate Obi-Wan of all his guilt, and why would Vader want to do that? I believe he would want Obi-Wan to blame himself for failing Anakin, whether or not Vader ever considered it his fault, and in fact, he even says to Obi-Wan in an earlier episode,
"What have you become?"
I am what you made me.
Which tells us all we need to know, I think. But it's because Vader says this that Obi-Wan is able to finally conclude that his friend is truly dead, taking one last look at him and saying, "Goodbye, Darth," before leaving. Not exactly sure where he thinks he's going, since Vader is still alive, though. Obi-Wan, kill him. He's beaten. He's at your mercy. Where the fuck are you going? Obi-Wan? Obi-Wan! See, even Vader's confused. Where are you going?
No. Come fix this.
The go-to defense for this scene has been that Obi-Wan didn't kill Vader here when given the chance because he didn't want to. Too bad? Like, I know you don't want to, and this is probably really hard for you, but... No, man, he's gotta die. Remember what happened last time you couldn't stomach killing him when you had the chance? This motherfucker survived and went on to commit atrocities untold. You have the chance right now to rectify this, and you're just fucking leaving? And at least on Mustafar, he was somewhat justified, because no reasonable person would look at this guy and consider him a threat. Like, yes, Obi-Wan chickened out, and yes, that was wrong of him, but I think it's pretty safe to assume when you're walking away from this scene that Anakin isn't fucking surviving that. Here, all you've done is slightly injure him. He'll simply go back to his ship, get cleaned up, and put on a new mask, and it'll be like nothing ever happened. Well, nothing except now Vader will be driven by an even deeper hatred for you and probably brutalize and kill more people because you let him live, you piece of shit. From where I sit, any blood on Vader's hands after this belongs on Obi-Wan's ledger too. You've doomed an entire galaxy to a horrific fate because you didn't have the fucking spine to do what needed to be done.
It's all Obi-Wan's fault. 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 It's all Obi-Wan's fault.
Oh, and for those of you who are gonna say Obi-Wan never wanted to kill Vader,
I can't kill my own father.
Then the Emperor has already won. You were our only hope.
Yeah, no, he wants him dead. He wants him super dead, but now this scene reads like he's asking Luke to do something that he had the chance to do twice and didn't. What a fucking asshole. The real reason why Obi-Wan didn't kill Vader here is not an in-universe one, of course. It was because obviously neither of them can die here, since they're both in the original trilogy, so we gotta make it so that one of them beats the other and then just walks away. Yeah, there are definitely better ways to write the outcome of a fight scene between two characters who are both meant to survive. Like, again, the Mustafar duel, where Anakin was as good as dead when Obi-Wan left him. Or Yoda being forced to retreat after losing to Sidious because the clones were coming in, he'd lost his lightsaber, and he was just clearly no match. It's possible to write a fight between Obi-Wan and Vader between the trilogies and have it end in a stalemate, but that requires putting in actual effort, not to mention talent. So instead, we'll just have Obi-Wan kinda forget that by walking away here, he's sentencing the galaxy to continue being subjugated by Vader for another 10 years. I mean, fuck, they couldn't even bother going the TFA route and having a chasm open up between them. That was at least something. Obi-Wan then gets into his ship and flies off of the moon, unimpeded by the Star Destroyer that Vader specifically ordered to follow him there rather than chase the rebels, so fuck, where is it? Where the fuck did it go? And don't tell me that it went back to chasing the rebels after Vader left, because not only would that be blatantly against his orders, but that would also imply that the conflict with the rebels is still ongoing, which kind of undermines the entire point of everything that just happened. And if they were gonna just go back to chasing the rebels after Vader went to go meet Obi-Wan, then why did they deviate from course in the first place? Not that any of that matters, though. They don't bother to show it on screen, but the rebels have successfully escaped. The next time we see Leia will be when she's back on Alderaan, so if the Star Destroyer did defy orders to go after them, they failed, which is just hilarious. But I doubt that's meant to be what happened, because that's something that you really need to show. Even just one scene of the Grand Inquisitor telling the officers to continue chasing the rebels, and the officers questioning him only for him to snap back that he'll have their heads for insubordination or something. That scene needs to be there. It's just weird because that's been a running trend throughout this whole show, but especially this episode. There are so many scenes missing, so many gaps in the story that you're left just having to kind of put it together yourself. It's such such a rushed mess. Anyway, that fight was horrible, but like I said earlier, it was happening concurrently with the Reva stuff, so now we gotta rewind a bit and talk about that shit. So Reva gets to the farm and walks into the little pit thing they have next to their igloo, and she starts stalking around looking for her prey, while Owen and Beru hide in their respective positions. She clearly doesn't know where they are, because I guess she can't sense them, and she's not really doing anything with her lightsaber to have any kind of defense for herself. Owen has a clean shot and is holding all the cards, and he misses. Not because he got unlucky, not because Reva's super fast force reflexes saved the day. He almost took her head clean off, but he missed just barely. And oh, what's that? Is that a scope I see on his gun? Why the fuck didn't he use it? He could have fired one shot and this whole conflict would be over, but instead, he just fucking eyeballed it, missing the Inquisitor that's hunting his child and exposing his position to her. Beru also starts firing, so now they're both compromised. She knows where they both are now, which is a pretty fucking ridiculous strategy considering now Reva knows where their attacks are coming from and she has the advantage, but I guess the element to surprise is stupid. Who cares about having strategic advantage in a fight against someone who overpowers you in every single way imaginable? Owen tells Beru to run and resorts to chucking random shit at Reva to try to buy his wife some time, and that's when it cuts back to the Obi-Wan Vader fight. So the next time we see them, they're in a completely different location, this little bridge that's right outside the room Luke's hiding in. Reva uses the Force to throw a thingy at Owen, which at best knocks him down for a second before he gets right back up. But in the time that takes him, Reva says, "You really love the boy. Like he's your own." And Owen replies, "He is my own," which is actually a neat little bit of dialogue. I like it a lot. But to balance it out, this scene also provides us with bad dialogue. Owen asks her what it is that she wants, and she says, "Justice." I'm not really sure what that means. Justice for what? This goes back to Reva's confusing motivations for literally everything she does throughout this episode, and later we're gonna see that she seems to think that by failing to kill Luke, she's somehow not done right by the younglings who fell beside her as she stood helpless and watched. But none of this is explained in any way that makes sense, so we're just left to accept that she wants to kill Luke now, I guess, because it's a way of getting justice for the younglings?
She's a complex character. Obi-Wan is clearly on the light side. Vader is clearly on the dark side. Reva's in the middle.
Shut the fuck up!
I already went over this, but again, she has no reason to believe that this boy is Vader's son, and even if she does manage to deduce that, it should be pretty fucking evident that Vader doesn't know about him. And if she thinks that by killing someone Vader cares about, that'll square away what he did to her classmates, then I don't know where the fuck she got that from. This whole subplot just reads as Reva's a bad guy, so Reva needs to fight good guys. And I may as well get into the fact that, yes, by the end of this episode, she becomes a Goodman. We're gonna get into that more when we actually get to it, but I just want to say that if you're trying to give Reva a last-minute redemption arc, you could have just had her come help Obi-Wan with Vader in the finale and cut out the Tatooine stuff entirely, considering how much that fucks with. Or you could even have her help the rebels get away while Obi-Wan deals with Vader. Maybe have her come up against the Grand Inquisitor and get some kind of closure for their rivalry. Wouldn't that be something? But instead, she's beating the shit out of Owen Lars. This is what they decided to do with this character. Obviously, she beats him because, believe it or not, Beru, you and your husband are not actually enough to stop an Inquisitor, and you were stupid as fuck for ever thinking otherwise. But she doesn't bother killing him because he's in the OT, so instead she just knocks him off the bridge and goes into the room, which is where Beru is hiding, obscured by the darkness, and she pops out of the shadows to hit Reva with something. Remember that gun she had a second ago? Yeah, what happened to that? This is yet another moment where they could have just killed her right then and there, but Beru elected not to just shoot the scary Inquisitor lady in the face, despite managing to get the jump on her. Though I will say Honor is not dead, because Reva at least repaid her in kind by electing not to kill her either, because again, she's in the original trilogy. Also, after clocking Reva in the face, Beru shouts, "Go!" which is when the camera turns to show us little Luke climbing out of a hole. Why didn't you do this 10 minutes ago? Why the fuck is he here? He's the reason Reva is here. Get him as far away from the farm as you can fucking manage. I also think it's really funny how they're trying to be like, oh, see, Luke's never seen a lightsaber until A New Hope, but he didn't see Reva here. He was already climbing through the hole when she came in. The canon is intact. Like, yeah, I guess Luke didn't look back at all while being chased by her, nor did he later question why Reva was in fact not a Tusken, as Owen previously said.
Tuskens are on the hunt again. They're raiding farms along the waste.
And you know what? Yeah, I can believe that Owen and Beru gaslit the fuck out of him anytime he ever tried to ask about this. That's completely within character. But just like I mentioned in part 1 about how Leia's dialogue in A New Hope no longer makes sense given her newly recontextualized relationship with Obi-Wan, now I have to wonder why Luke didn't say, oh wait, I've seen one of these before. Some weirdly dressed Tusken chased me into a canyon with one. That one was red. So now we're caught up to where we were earlier, with Obi-Wan having defeated Vader and leaving him there, and he's leaving the moon, and he senses through the Force Luke is in danger. Specifically, Reva has just chased him into this canyon and knocked him off the ridge on which he was hiding from her, rendering him unconscious. Obi-Wan springs into action, jumping into hyperspace, and obviously Obi-Wan's not gonna get there in time, so Luke is completely at Reva's mercy here. And so she turns on her lightsaber, slowly approaches Luke, and bam! In his place, she sees her younger self. It's the most obvious thing in the world, everyone was expecting it, and now it's happened. Woohoo. This seems to put things into perspective for her, as only now she realizes that by killing this child, she will become just like Vader. You might even say she will become the very thing she swore to destroy. This might have even been an impactful moment had we not seen previously that she's perfectly willing to slaughter innocents, even children, if it gets her closer to achieving her goals. Hell, she was even about to torture one not that long ago, and for no real reason I can think of, considering finding the rebels had nothing whatsoever to do with defeating Vader. And she was planning to let them escape to track them back to the rebels anyway, so there's no need to get the information out of Leia this way. I don't know what else I'm meant to conclude from that scene with the added bit of context and hindsight, other than that she simply wanted to. How charming. But yeah, Kid Luke reminds her of Kid Reva, or whatever the fuck. I don't know. Killing kids is bad, and it takes her this long to realize that. I only wish she'd had any discernible reason whatsoever for trying to kill this kid specifically. Maybe then we might have actually had some semblance of a cohesive arc for this character. But I suppose we can't always get what we want, so let's just fucking move on and be done with this. Obi-Wan gets back to Tatooine at this point, despite the fact that it's been like 5 minutes tops, because again, this is no longer a galaxy with a vast scale transcending billions of light years. Hyperspace is basically teleportation, just ask Tross. But anyway, Obi-Wan is here now, and he lands his ship down on the Lars farm where he finds them screaming out Luke's name in search of him. He's about to go look in the dune sea, but then Beru sees something off in the distance and alerts him to it. It's Reva carrying the unconscious Luke back to his parents. She falls to her knees, placing Luke on the ground, and Owen and Beru pick him up, leaving her and Obi-Wan to have a little chat. Reva laments that she couldn't do it, and that because she wasn't able to bring herself to mercilessly slaughter an innocent child, she has failed the youngling. Again, she's just very dumb. Like, there really is no other way of putting it. She actually thought that this was what her friends would have wanted. Obi-Wan has to tell her that by showing mercy, she's given them peace. And when she asks if she's become Vader, he tells her that by doing this, she's chosen not to, and that who she becomes now is up to her. I just can't believe this. What the fuck is this redemption? I don't even understand what belief system Reva previously held because it's been so poorly conveyed, so I don't know what conclusion she just came to. I guess she's a good guy now. I just don't know. Who in the name of God wrote the fucking script for this? Who willingly attached this to their resume? I want names. You know, a lot of people like to make the argument that Vader's redemption was cheap because despite all the horrors and atrocities he committed in his life, we're all willing to accept that he came around in the end simply for saving one person and killing the Emperor. But the thing these people always forget is that Vader died. Had he survived Return of the Jedi, there would have been a penance for his crimes. Most likely he would have spent the rest of his life in prison, and that's only because Luke's pleas alone might have saved him from being executed. But the thing about redemption is that it's not actually about how much good you do to make up for your past. It's about what's truly in your heart for as long as you'll continue to live. They chickened out of having to deal with this with Ben Solo, but they actually have an opportunity here to show it with Reva. If ever her character returns, we could definitely see her spending the rest of her life in atonement, constantly having to live down the fact that she's hurt and killed so many people. I'd like to think a story like that could still be promising, but this show drained any real interest I might have had in this character and Disney Star Wars as a whole, frankly. And besides, I still don't understand pretty much any of the decisions that she's made throughout this show or the reasoning behind said decisions, because we're never given anything definitive as to her motivations as a character. I simply don't think a story about her making up for her past would be able to handle that very well, because they have nothing to work with. And that's all without mentioning what Obi-Wan is gonna do about all this. I mean, I know she's really meant to be good by this point, but I don't see how he can ever trust her to leave this planet. Who knows who she could tell, either intentionally or otherwise? What if Vader catches up to her and tortures her for information? She knows everything. She knows where you live, she knows who Luke is, everything. Oh, and that reminds me, they need to all get the fuck out of Tatooine. Yeah, I'm sorry, Beru, I know you love your home or whatever the fuck, but that ship has sailed. There's no telling who Reva told or how she even found out about you guys. And even if she told you, are you really gonna trust the woman who just tried to kill your son? And what if somebody in town reported a lady dressed in black displaying force powers? Maybe a disgruntled asshole whose cup of water she knocked out of his hand. I'm sure the Empire would pay a pretty penny for that kind of information. The point is, there are way too many variables for them to ever truly be safe on Tatooine. The only reason they end up staying is because they happen to live there in A New Hope, but that simply isn't good enough. If you're gonna write it so that a fucking Inquisitor found out about Luke goddamn Skywalker and learned where he lived, then you're gonna need to write it in a way so that the Lars family is in the clear by the end. You have to write it so that there's not a single doubt in any of their minds that the Empire doesn't know about them, because if there's even a possibility that they do, they'd all be fucking idiots to stay. But I'm not sure if a conversation like this even took place, or how really any of this went down with Reva, because we cut to Mustafar where Vader is giving a report to Palpatine. We get some generic villain dialogue, Kenobi will not escape, yada yada, and I really like this line from Palpatine.
You seem agitated, my friend.
Like, yeah? I don't know, it's just a really funny line. I'm not criticizing it. I just love my boy. It's good to see him. This is also the first and only scene on this show where we get to hear the Imperial March, which, as it happens, was intended by Deborah Chow. According to composer Natalie Holt, who scored many of the tracks for this show, old Deb didn't want to use the iconic Vader theme because he was still half Anakin. Quote, if we were going to use the Vader theme, I don't think we should use it until episode 6, because he's still half Anakin, half Vader at this point. When his mask cracks open at the end and he says, you didn't kill Anakin Skywalker, I did. You realize now he's Vader. Now he's earned his Imperial March. Now when you hear it, it's so powerful. Wow! The Lion, the Witch, and the audacity of this bitch. I don't know who the fuck you think you are acting like Vader needs to earn it. He wasn't half Anakin in this show. He was full Vader by the end of Revenge of the Sith. You don't just get to undo some of that in order to slap it onto your abominable recreation of this iconic character. Fuck you. How dare you? So then we go back to Alderaan just to catch up with Leia and confirm that she's home safe, I guess. Nice to see. And she's wearing the holster Obi-Wan gave her, which is meant to hint to us, the audience, that she's now starting on her path to becoming the Leia we all know and love. How fun. Her mother comes into the room and takes her to the docking bay where Bail is waiting for them. She asks who they're greeting today and guesses that it's more cousins, to which Bail says, not exactly. And who should step out of the ship other than Obi-Wan motherfucking Kenobi-Wan Kenobi? And look who's with him! It's fucking Lola!
Who am I to separate a young lady from her droid?
So, just to make sure we're all following, Obi-Wan left Tatooine to go save Leia, went on a whole mission that almost got him killed, and while he was gone, Luke almost fucking died. But sure, let's just leave Tatooine again. Wouldn't want Leia to be separated from her fucking droid. Are you fucking kidding me, show? Are you really doing this to me right now? Well, since he's here, I guess Obi-Wan might have a few words to say to Bail about that dumb as fuck message. He's hugging. They're hugging. Okay, well, that's... Alright, gotta end this on a happy note, I guess. And it's not like this clone masquerading as Obi-Wan is smart enough to realize when people he considers friends have done things to endanger his safety and that of the people he's trying to protect, so who fucking cares? Bail then says that he fears for Leia's future as the Empire continues to grow stronger and bolder, which is an interesting thing to say as someone who still somehow has a seat in the Senate, and whose daughter continues to not be kidnapped by Vader despite her being his best link to finding Obi-Wan. And I don't know about stronger either. That stormtrooper armor gets significantly weaker as time passes. But I suppose it's the sentiment that counts, and so Obi-Wan tells him that if they ever need him again, they should not hesitate to call. Just looking to confirm, Obi-Wan intends to keep leaving Tatooine whenever danger arises, because apparently he didn't learn his fucking lesson this time around. Cool, got it. He then approaches Leia, and she asks if she'll ever see him again. He says maybe, if she ever needs help from a tired old man, but that they must be careful. No one can know, or it would endanger them both. Unironically, this is is a line that people have pointed me to when I bring up the fact that Obi-Wan and Leia knowing each other fucks with the OT. They're like, see, he told her not to tell anyone about their adventures together, which is just such a strange argument because the criticism that I leveled at it is in regards to her iconic message to him, pleading for his help getting the Death Star plans to Alderaan. You know, one that's meant for Obi-Wan's eyes only, and one that, should it fall into the Empire's hands, would confirm for a fact that Leia is a rebel, that the Organas always knew where Obi-Wan was hiding, and the fact that he's living on Tatooine. If the Empire gets a hold of that message, them finding out that Leia and Obi-Wan know each other is the least of their problems. But also, the Empire already fucking know they know each other. That's the problem. Leia's kidnapping is what drew Kenobi out of hiding. They met because of the Empire. What the fuck do you mean they wanted to keep it a secret? If anything, this line only exists specifically to try to put a band-aid on that gaping stab wound of a plot hole, and it's one that's pretty lackluster and makes absolutely no sense upon even the smallest scrutiny. So the fact that it actually worked on some people is honestly kinda sad. Any Kenobi defenders out there hate watching me right now, I really hope you guys get some fucking standards. Jesus Christ. So they hug and say their goodbyes, and then Obi-Wan fucks back off to Tatooine. By the way, just to add insult to injury, now Obi-Wan has a ship with a working hyperdrive, so where'd that go? That could have probably saved him a lot of time getting to Alderaan in A New Hope, but whatever. This show doesn't fucking care about those movies. That's been proven. At this point, I'm just repeating myself. Obi-Wan goes home and packs up his things to move out of the cave, because I guess this is meant to be when he got his hut. And frankly, I'm surprised they didn't show it, considering the show's obsession with member berries. Speaking of which, he stops by the Lars homestead to let Owen know that he's gonna be leaving them alone for a while and let Luke just be a kid. And Owen asks if he'd like to finally meet him. We then see Obi-Wan walk right up to Luke and say,
Hello there.
Yes!
Yes! Yes!
He said the thing! He said the thing!
Oh, classic Obi-Wan. It took 6 episodes to build up to it, and it was worth it.
A little part of me just died. The final scene of this show is Obi-Wan quite literally riding off into the sunset, but not before he stops and has a chat with an old friend. At long last, Qui-Gon Jinn appears in his ghostly form, and he's certainly there. Look, Qui-Gon's here. How neat. He just kind of stands there and spouts off some generic shit about having always been there, but Obi-Wan wasn't ready to see. Which is actually a good point, technically, since as I got into in the last video, Obi-Wan cut himself off from the Force for 10 years, so why the fuck was he expecting any answers? But even putting that aside, thanks for fucking nothing, Qui-Gon. He could have used your help. I've already gone over 2 different scenes in just this episode where he could have shown up and given Obi-Wan some meaningful advice, wisdom, and or encouragement in the face of adversity. But sure, let's just save it for the very fucking end of the show. Let's have Liam Neeson come back in a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to have these characters and these actors interact one last time, and have it be this cookie-cutter garbage. What the fucking fuck? Oh, and by the way, Qui-Gon isn't supposed to be able to appear visibly. I know Force Ghost rules are pretty much fucked at this point anyway, thanks to the sequels, but the Clone Wars series clearly establishes that he never completed his training, so he can only manifest as a voice.
Show yourself, can you?
I cannot. My training was incomplete.
He only showed up visibly in the Mortis episodes because Mortis is literally a realm steeped in the Force, so everyone is much more powerful there. So, you know, just throw that onto the ever-building pile of things this dumbass show contradicted. Good lord. But anyway, that about wraps it up. Kenobi rides off into the sunset, and we get one last shot of him going toward a canyon and cut to credits. It's finally fucking over, holy shit. What a fucking mess. So, final thoughts? I don't even know where to begin, honestly. This is one of the worst shows I've ever had the displeasure of watching, and the fact that anyone can sit there and tell me that it's good is just beyond me. I'm just about done being told I should be grateful for just getting an Obi-Wan show, when this is the most worthless waste of Ewan McGregor, Hayden Christensen, Liam Neeson, and James Earl Jones I've ever fucking seen. I think what really gets me is how many people call it a mixed bag. Like, oh, it had some good, had some bad. Good? What good? The amount of scenes I can even say I liked on a superficial level I can count on one hand. What the ever-loving fuck do you mean, mixed bag? Before I wrap this up, there are a few things I wanted to mention. Some of you have commented about a channel called Aeronauts, who do a lot of spoof dubs for a bunch of different things, Star Wars included, and one series they've been doing is called Larry, which is a dub of Kenobi. Since you guys keep mentioning it, I thought I'd go ahead and check it out, and yeah, it's pretty funny. Thanks for letting me know. For any of you who haven't heard of them and could use a good laugh, go watch watch their series. It's fucking hilarious. Link is in the description. Also among the links in the description, you'll find Logan's video on Kenobi, which is a pretty cool review, and it's the origin for the infamous PNG of him I keep using for my live Sheev reaction videos. Some of you have been asking about it, so I figured I'd let you know. And finally, I wanted to recommend the Patterson cut, which is where someone took every episode of Kenobi and turned it into a movie, editing it when and where they could to try to make the show better. A lot of you recommended it to me after I put out part 1, but actually I had already seen it, and I thought it was a-okay. The thing is, the premise of this show is fundamentally beyond repair, and the person who made the Patterson cut only had the footage that actually exists to work with, so there was only so much that they could really do. That being said, I still think it's a bad story, but it's improved significantly from the show. It cuts out all the needless bullshit from the show that only exists to pad the runtime, including literally everything with Reva in episode 6. Yes, you heard me right. In this version of the story, Reva dies on Jabeam, and it stays that way. Go figure. A Star Wars death that is actually permanent. What are the odds? And that's just one of the many improvements made by the Patterson cut, as well as, like I said, some pretty sick additions that make the story just that much better. I absolutely recommend giving it a watch, and the link will be down with the rest. But otherwise, I think that just about covers it. Thank you guys a ton and a half for watching, and have an absolutely phenomenal National Bubble Wrap Appreciation Day.
Next time, baby.